Level up your success with the ICABA World Network, where accomplished Black professionals and entrepreneurs have created a thriving global ecosystem built from valuable connections and impactful collaborations. Be a part of a trusted network that uplifts, inspires, and enhances your success. Join like-minded and leading Black professionals to foster meaningful relationships, unlock opportunities, and access the resources you need to thrive in your career, business, and life. Go to ICABAWorldNetwork.com and join today.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Black Professionals Month. And today we are coming to the end of our programming for Black Professionals Month, and we're closing out with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Conference and Awards 2021. We are extremely happy that you are here with us. We have had a great 31 days of events, programs, and celebrations that are unprecedented for Black professionals. We're here to celebrate Black professional excellence, and we're also here to convene and gather so that we can connect, collaborate, and build a trusted online community worldwide for Black professionals. So thank you for being here with us here today. We've got a great program lined up for you. And it is my pleasure as a co-founder of Black Professionals Month to welcome you here this morning. And just wanted to go over a couple of the ground rules, if you will, rules of engagement for today. And so we're going to get started out with the agenda. We're going to have basically three parts of the agenda. We have our first panel and speaker, and the topic is the inequity of equality. And then we will take a 15-minute break, and then we'll go into the second panel. And that panel will be striking while we're hot. And when that panel is finished, then we will go into our keynote address. And following that, we'll do the awards program. And so we ask that you stay muted. And I also want to have my co-founder, Denise Kegler, to wave. I see her, she's looking right at me, so she's co-founder. You will be hearing from her a little bit later on. And so if you have any questions, please ask them in the chat. And we have part of our production team that is monitoring the chat. And so we'll be able to get your questions there. We are recording everything today. So all the recordings for not only today, but all of the other sessions that we've had, which have been over 60 sessions during Black Professionals Month with close to 70 speakers. So we've had a lot of folks involved in putting this together. Also, so that I don't forget, as I'm thinking of it right now, say thank you to Gina, Alexis, and the production team who are in the background, making sure that everything is going okay. So Charles and Curleen and Reggie Lewis and Horace and Naomi Hutchison and Kristen Hutchinson. And I sure hope I didn't miss anybody. You know, when you start naming names, you're going to get in trouble. So I'm going to now introduce our mistress of ceremonies. And she is the director for cultural competency at the Maynard Institute for Journalism Education. And she serves as a coach on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging issues in coverage and staffing for more than 80 print and broadcast news organizations in the Knight Linfest table stakes newsroom innovation programs across the country. She also works as a DE&I trainer and newsroom organizational change consultant for the Maynard Institute, the oldest journalism nonprofit dedicated to diversifying America's newsrooms. Prior to joining the Maynard Institute in 2020, Felicia Henderson led the entertainment and lifestyle department at the Detroit News. As assistant managing editor, she managed upwards of 45 journalists and was a member of the news organization's senior management team responsible for newsroom operations. She started a journalism career at her hometown newspaper, the Courier Journal in Louisville, Kentucky, and had stints at the Cincinnati Post and the Detroit Free Press. It's a lot of great people that come out of Louisville, Kentucky. She is also a longtime member of the National Association of Journalists, and she is the two-term president of the Detroit chapter. So we are very pleased and honored to have Felicia Henderson with us today, and it is my pleasure to be able to turn this over to Felicia, and it's all yours.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Jerome. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Nikki Lanier. Nikki Lanier is Senior Vice President of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. She leads all branch activities, such as conducting economic research, education, and promoting financial stability for low and moderate income communities. A member of the bank's management committee, she helps to oversee the overall strategic direction for the Federal Reserve Bank. However, at the end of this year, Nikki is transitioning to CEO of Harper Slade, a racial equity advisory firm focused on helping companies advance people of color in work as an economic imperative. Nikki has over 25 years of experience in human resources, labor and employment law, collective bargaining, central banking, and state government, and has worked with numerous organizations, including Philip Morris and Georgia Pacific. Nikki has served as Personnel Cabinet Secretary for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, becoming the youngest and first Black female appointee. Nikki is an author, a sought-after keynote speaker, and a recipient of numerous awards. She earned a Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Miami School of Law, a bachelor's in journalism from Hampton University, and she holds certification in collective bargaining, Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations. Nikki is an adjunct professor for the University of Louisville's College of Business, where she also serves on the Board of Advisors. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nikki Lanier.
Felicia, thank you so much. Thank you for that very gracious and super long, I need to cut down that bio introduction. Thank you for that. Let me just say, it is my honor. I am so honored to be a part of this illustrious lineup. And I just want to say, especially to Denise and Jerome, how much I appreciate your tenacity and your veracity, your courage and your conviction in establishing this inaugural season, amplifying our voices. It is tremendously important. And when we look back on this moment years from now, and all of the wonderful Black professional months to come, we will be so very thankful and appreciative of the deposit that you have made today. So thank you so much for this entire month. All right, I'm gonna see if I get my screen shared and get this party started. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the inequity of equality. And I want to do so from the perspective of both of the roles that I hold, my current role with the Federal Reserve Bank and my role to come as the CEO of Harper Slade Racial Equity. Let me just spend a few seconds on the role with the Federal Reserve. So with the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, I am the Senior Vice President and Regional Executive. I am the presence of the Fed in this particular neck of the woods, Central Kentucky, Western Kentucky, Southern Indiana. And my job is to personify the Fed, to talk about monetary policy, to help demystify the work of macroeconomic theory, and to find communities where these concepts and these ideals have been far too esoteric.
Recording in progress.
Far too esoteric so long. And to make sure that we are being really visible and accessible in the communities that we serve. Can you all still hear me okay? Excellent, okay. So what I want to start with stating emphatically at the outset is a fairly bold statement, perhaps provocative, but it is this: the pursuit of equality will and has hampered the US economy and is de facto inequitable. Let me hasten to add very quickly that the views that I will be expressing today are attributable to me and me alone. They are not attributable to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis or the system overall. All right, so I think it's important to kind of root ourselves in a common nomenclature and understanding what it is that we are talking about, what it is that I'm talking about when I'm making the distinction between equality and equity, and specifically my view of racial equity. This view, this definition of racial equity is exactly what will be informing my work as the CEO of Harper Slade, and what, quite frankly, has instructed my view of how to practice as an HR leader, as a labor and employment attorney, and certainly as a leader with the Federal Reserve. So the definition is this: racial equity is proportional fairness that takes into full account the cultural and historic realities facing people of color as distinct from all other people, and works to remedy the same. Two things to note here. It is about proportional fairness, and is in fact remedial. So racial equity is hard work. It is not just about how might we stop the bleeding of race-based marginalization and exclusion and muting. So it's more than just stopping the bleeding. It's actually about how do we treat the now infected wound that has been left by the cumulative impact of hate and the many manifestations of that, and how we have experienced that over the years that it has been in existence in our country. So let me just pause here for a second, because what I'm going to talk about now for the rest of the talk is really rooted more in kind of some of the economic numbers, but I want to give you some context around that. So when I think about the DEI work that many of us have undertaken over the last several decades, one of the things that I am curious about is the extent to which DEI sometimes presumes sameness as the goal, sameness as the remedy. So the idea that perhaps in the pursuit of DEI, we can just do better at doling out the same for all folks. And I think that is ineffectual. I think that most companies think about DEI in a way that, quite frankly, is somewhat lazy, especially when you compare that to the rigor and to the commitment, structural and otherwise, and behavioral, that we often assign to any other strategic imperative in the workplace. So it is my estimation that most of us, many of us, are far too lazy when it comes to the way that we think about DEI and corporate constructs. When I say us, I'm really talking about just organizations, corporations overall, not a singular practitioner. So a couple things in my mind make this true. One is that we tend to blur and meld these concepts of D, E, and I without a real understanding of the rigor and the discipline and the strategy that really must be assigned to each of those letters, each of those concepts. They really are distinct and in some ways even disparate. And so that is an unpacking of doctrines, a resetting of ideals that really will require us to get better at understanding what each of those letters mean and how they play out in the workplace. So said differently, DEI should be a very kind of paced and sequenced, thoughtful and methodical approached strategy over time, rather than kind of a singular blurb of work that some of us approach it as. I think it should be more carefully executed because it is, quite frankly, counterculture. It is counterculture, this idea of embracing diversity, embracing equity, and embracing inclusion is counterculture. So just really thinking very carefully about how we approach that. Sometimes we just blur it all together. And so we do, in doing so, we don't really understand and take the time to understand the focus that's required for each of those. The other point that I like to make on this is that oftentimes DEI tends to be kind of a bolt-on to our existing work. It is not the work, it becomes ancillary to it. And so the work and strategy becomes awkwardly resourced when it comes to DEI. So when I think about what I have observed in corporate organizations with leaders and how we think about strategy, we do tend to think about it in terms of how we cast visions that we can align our organization against and that we can inspire action toward. And then we allocate resources commensurate with or in furtherance of that vision. And then we build individual and organizational capability to help bolster and buoy all of it. And so if we think about DEI as a bolt-on, to our strategic work, it never gets allocated or assigned the same kind of visionary practice, the same kind of resource allocation outlay, and the building of individual and organizational capability that typically comes with most any other strategic framework or strategic priority that we're promulgating in work. So it's important that it be embedded into the work. And then we sometimes attach to DEI this kind of right thing to do argument, or perhaps a social justice argument. And neither, in my view, have really been all that compelling in resetting and challenging capitalist structures. And so when we think about industrialization of work and workplaces and companies, it is a capitalist construct that has really never been compelled by or moved by right thing to do arguments, right thing to do rooted arguments, or social justice ideology. And yet, for some reason, especially when we think about how incredibly disruptive DEI ought to be, we believe that we can get there organizationally by rooting that work in a right thing to do and social justice argument. Moreover, we then sometimes pour on top of that idea a business imperative, but it's hard to kind of quantify what that business imperative really might be. And so I'd offer a couple of things, in my opinion, to really get the kind of momentum and demonstrable wholesale transformation that we are looking for in racial equity and in the DEI work. We really have to think about work and how it has been the source of marginalization, work and how it has been the source of isolation, work and how it has been the source of stunted and sometimes muted potency for people who are beleaguered under the weight of an externally defined deficit narrative. People like women and the disabled and LGBTQ and people of color and others. So anyone that is kind of burdened by those narratives find their way in workplaces to be a far more clunky experience by and large than the rest of us. And so then that becomes, I think, the unpacking of the work, that we can root arguments in and shift paradigms around how we think about DEI in already existing constructs. So in my view, as we think about equity and equality, focusing on right thing to do related arguments and social justice, or maybe even blanket business imperative without really unpacking that, isn't as compelling as thinking about what's already in play, what nomenclature, structures, and ideals are already in play in the workplace that we can attach this work to. Things like employee engagement, super important to just about everybody who is on this call, or you have clients or you're in an organization for whom employee engagement is highly coveted. I mean, we're like salivating over this ever elusive employee engagement ideal. So if we think about employee engagement as a diversity and inclusion prerogative, and then think about workforce forecasting and talent management strategies of the future as a racial equity imperative, then we're attaching these ideals to doctrines that are already living and breathing in our workplace. And those ideals, quite frankly, are more aligned to American capitalist constructs. So for the rest of my time, I want to talk about that American capitalist construct in the context of the ever important middle class of our country. So when we look at the browning of the United States, by 2045, I'm sure many of you have seen this statistic, the majority in the workforce will be Black and brown. And so that will mean that by that same year, we will have to have bold and unprecedented ascension of people of color into the middle class and beyond. And so where do we find that middle class income earning opportunity? It is in the workplace. It is in our capitalist corporate construct. So that remedy, this racial equity remedy, has to happen in the workplace. not exclusively, but primarily. And so there, for that reason, it's a conundrum that transcends this right thing to do argument of the past and does require our demonstrative correction of the lingering impact of difference equating to deficit. One of the things that the Fed is now reckoning with more earnestly is the role of racism and the role of inequity-rooted racism and how it is a significant macro, not micro, economic issue. In fact, I would argue probably one of the more pronounced and profound economic issues that we face today. And therefore, it really needs to be addressed in every single system and structure where it thrives. All right, let's see. So we look at a couple of research studies. So the Fed is very research intensive, and a couple things come to mind that we rely on. Pew Research is one of those organizations that we rely very heavily on. And so when we look at a household with income between 2/3 of and double the median household income, that's what we consider to be the middle class. Why is the middle class so important? So the Federal Reserve spends a lot of time looking at, studying, paying attention to the health of the middle class. It is where our taxing structure finds its most important resonance. It is where we find stability with our Social Security system so that we can have some understanding of who can retire when, what can actually bolster, what do we have by way of a healthy middle class, so we know how to bolster and support retirement structures that come out of that are based on Social Security health. It is where we find our consumption numbers. So we think about how do we consume as a society. The first place that we often look to determine the health of consumption numbers is at our middle class strata. It's where we look to for our purposes of determining GDP health, productivity, workforce productivity and output productivity. And then of course, it is where a lot of our kind of governmental fiscal policy structure also rests. So the health of the middle class is super important. And so therefore it means that because by 2045, we'll have the minority in the workforce, we must also have the minority in the middle class. So when we look at 2021 numbers, the national median income is about $79,000, which means that you could fall within the middle class. Sorry, I can't get my thing going here. You could fall within the middle class income with an income between $53,266 or $159,800. So that is the breadth, the span of middle income earners that we pay attention to. So watch this. When we look at what that breaks down to by demography, and I think about this pursuit of sameness, what has it actually yielded by way of impact in closing equity gaps? Not much. So look at the yellow, Black households. We are the only group demography that has not yet reached our current middle income attainment. So we are below the Asian household, which actually is the highest at 98,000, Hispanic households, 56, and of course, most predominantly white households, 76,000. And so when we think about what do we earn on the dollar, 2019 numbers suggest that the Black household earns just 61 cents for every dollar of income of the median white household, and Hispanic households earned only 74 cents. So we've got a lot of work to do if we're going to look at how we can assure that within the next only 24 short years, that we've got more Black and brown, Black and Hispanic specifically, in the middle class income earning strata. This is another chart that just kind of shows another way of looking at exactly what I just shared. All right, so this idea, I'm sure that many of you have seen this graphic before, this idea that equality and equity are very different ideals, very different constructs. And so for me, when I think about what really is the strategic or economic value of equality, quite frankly, I struggle. I struggle to understand what either ideal, strategic, or economic value can really be assigned to the way that we think about equality, that is sameness, at least in the context of work and certainly in the context of economic well-being. There was a time, likely post-slavery, perhaps pre-Jim Crow, where the pursuit of equality might have actually been an equalizer in terms of how we enjoy and understand being able to plug into this elusive American dream from a capitalist standpoint. But the cumulative effect of us having years and years and years and years of just not getting this right, we're now at the point, the sense of urgency that demands that we look at equity really as the desired goal and not equality. So there's some real gaps and costs associated with inequity, particularly as it relates to GDP. Closing the wage gap alone between Black and white employees could have added $2.7 trillion of GDP each year into the American economy. So when we think about those kinds of numbers, they really are quite staggering. For those of you that might be interested in more of a deep dive on this, I'd encourage you to follow the work of the San Francisco Fed. They've got some really provocative studies that are coming out about the costs of inequality. And this statistic is actually from that study that was just issued at the beginning of this year. Furthermore, so beyond the GDP implications, there's some real costs to inequity when it relates to the employer conundrum. When you look at turnover due to racial inequity in the workplace, it's cost us about $172 billion over the last 5 years. And this is according to a new research study that's been promulgated by the Society for Human Resources Management. 1/3 of Black employees face unfair treatment at work based on race and ethnicity in the past year. And over 2 in 5 workers say they have experienced this in the past 5 years. And then over 2 in 5 workers, 42% feel as though they have faced race or ethnic-based unfairness in the workplace in the last 5 years. And again, listen, this is all of this is happening where we have alive and breathing and arguably sustaining active DEI efforts in just about all of our workplaces. And yet we're still yielding results like this. Part of my argument and part of the reason why I am kind of throwing all my eggs in this racial equity pursuit basket is because I believe that fundamentally we have an issue with blurring the lines between equality and equity and have been pursuing equality, even that, quite frankly, with fairly lackluster results. But now, given the reality of equity and the needs from an economic standpoint and the needs from an employee engagement standpoint and workforce forecasting standpoint, we're in a very different time, a very different dispensation in time in terms of what we ought to pursue. All right, more, good Lord. So over the same period, 26% of Asians and 21% of Hispanics or Latinos felt like they have experienced unfair treatment in the workplace due to their race or ethnicity. Not to mention absenteeism. We all know that absenteeism is a fairly costly issue that happens in the workplace, very costly. And so when you think about anxiety and worry and stress and frustration stemming from experiencing or witnessing unfair treatment based on race or ethnicity in the past year, this could have cost $54 billion just in 1 year alone. Not to mention lost productivity, that's even more costly, and that carries about a $59 billion price tag in the last year. So there are some real issues with regard to the way that we think about how work has worked as it relates to the DEI construct and how we think about the pursuit of equality versus equity. So I'll end with this, and I'm happy to take some questions if there are any. Because a couple of takeaways. One, inequity and racism are macroeconomic issues. I want to punctuate that because, the Federal Reserve arguably is one of the institutions, probably the institution in our country that kind of has some level of credibility in helping us to understand how macroeconomic issues unfold. And even our formidable and storied institution kind of came to this idea later rather than sooner. And that is, while we've always been studying the role of inequity in economic theory and economic constructs, and while we've always had conversations about the demography and the implications around that as it relates to how people experience economic realities and economic pursuits, we are new to this awakening that this racism conundrum and the cumulative and current effect of inequity really is a macroeconomic issue, one that impacts the entire society overall and will continue to impact the entire society as the browning of America continues. One of our wonderful statesmen here in Kentucky, John Yarmouth, who was a United States congressman, has said publicly in a couple of speeches that it is in white America's best interest that Black and brown America thrive. And no truer statement, in my view, has ever been uttered. This is absolutely a fact. So the next point, the browning of the country requires new and acute understanding of Black and brown dynamics in and at work. DEI really should be a paced, sequenced, and disciplined practice. They are very separate doctrines, and they require separate ways of thinking about how you allocate vision and resources and capability development in furtherance of each one of those. And it really does depend on where your organization is in terms of the sophistication level that you're ready to embrace regarding that trajectory. In my view, racial equity is the workforce forecasting and talent development strategy henceforth. It just is that. Why? Because when we look at who will be available to choose from in terms of available workers going forward, that population will be Blacker and browner. And it will be the well-served and formidable organization that understands that today and positions its thinking, its belief systems, its strategies, its ideals, and its policies in furtherance of embracing racial equity in work. And then finally, organizations will need help reframing and resetting their values, strategies, and beliefs that will achieve all of these goals. Because here's what I would say to this. Listen, we've never seen a world where racial equity exists. We've never seen it in any construct, in any system, in any organization, in any societal setting. Racial equity is de facto disruptive. It is unknown. We have no picture of what that has been or could be. And yet we've got to chart this course. Many are daunted by the idea of racial equity and how to really embrace DEI in ways that unpack beliefs and values and strategies, conversations, and the lens, the equity lens that many of us hold individually. And yet that is the work, in my view, that is the work. And it is hard work because we've never seen it before. So with grace and with a fair amount of patience, urgency, but patience with the individuals, we'll need to pursue this work together. Okay, so with that, I am happy to open up the floor to questions. Felicia, I will turn it back over to you.
Nikki, I'm just blown away. I mean, your presentation was so powerful, so informative. I just wrote down on my paper, racial equity is de facto disruptive. Wow. Wow, you've given us a lot to think about. There were many questions in the chat. I have a few of my own, but I will go to the chat because we've got time to take a number of questions. The first one is, does the median household rate take into account how many of the family members are wage earners? Many single parent households, there are many single parent households in our families.
It does.
Can you stop sharing Nikki's screen?
Oh, sorry. Yep. Sorry. Yep. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, it does. It does take that into account if it is, as long as it's reported. I mean, if it's reported by that household for each of those income earners, then it will be reported in the data that we rely on, that we see at the Fed.
Okay. The next question, if 2045 is a benchmark for change, how do we educate our children at home and in the education industry, since they will be the generation faced with driving the change forward?
So the interesting thing is, and I'm interested in maybe some other thoughts on this. So generationally, as the younger generations are now becoming more aware of and understanding kind of the dynamics at play around how race works in our country, what is assigned to it by way of real lived experiences. I'm finding, I'm sure you all are finding this too, that the younger the generation, the more kind of, I'll say, intolerant they are of intolerance. And so I don't know that the education necessarily needs to happen in the same way with our younger folks as it does with those who will be the decision makers in terms of who will be hiring these folks, hiring our younger folks. And so that's why I think, we only have 24 years to try to correct what we haven't been able to address over the last 400. So it really is our generation, so the folks that are represented in these boxes, and our children who will be responsible for carving out new workplace cultures, new social norms at work, new awakened and more acutely sophisticated understanding of multiculturalism and how to activate and amplify the best of Black and Brown in work at the same time that you're not isolating and muting white voices in the workplace. So I think the balance of the education, if you will, meaning the changing of mindsets, ideals, and kind of foundational value systems, is really ours to reckon with, is ours to own, and perhaps the generation right underneath us, but not the younger kids.
So when you're talking about the mindset, you mentioned, you said DEI is a capitalist construct. Can you explain that?
So DEI operates underneath a capitalist construct. So when we think about like the industrial workplaces, the industrialization of work, it is based on capitalistic ideals, making money, sustaining. So it's all about this kind of capitalist ideal. And that's actually not a bad thing because we have to have really viable firms to help sustain our overall economic performance. It is the basis of the American economy, is this kind of capitalist understanding of rooting ourselves in money. So it's not by itself a bad thing, but what I suggested or am suggesting is that when we talk about DEI, we talk about it outside of the construct in which it lives. And so that's why I think sometimes we have these like fits and starts and we can't really get a lot of momentum in the work because it is not, no matter what nomenclature we assign to it. So we try to say, okay, well, there's a business case and it's the right thing to do. And it's social justice. And so all of that is fine, but it doesn't attach to the way that capitalist structures think. Capitalist structures think in terms of P&L. They think in terms of macro and microeconomics. They think in terms of how to coalesce their talent strategies and furtherance of all of that. And so things like employee engagement and workforce development or workforce forecasting are already constructs that operate inside of capitalist regimes. So I would suggest that we would do well to think about DEI and to cast it as strategic imperatives using the same nomenclature and the same structures that are already in play inside of capitalist structures.
Okay, very good. A related question. I would be interested in hearing more on how to shift from the right thing to do argument to develop a better argument to embrace DE&I in a deeper way?
Yeah, I think starting with the demography, and employers, I don't know any employer that's not compelled by and informed by the future of work. We're all talking about that now. The future of work is Blacker and browner. That's it. So that's one way to talk about it. We talk about how to find our way toward greater unlocking greater discretionary effort with our employees that then begets more innovation, that then begets a more competitive organization. Well, it's hard to do that. It's hard to find your way toward engagement if you're batting away messages of marginalization in the workplace and with whatever frequency that is showing up. So when we think about what most of us want in and from work, there's a couple of things that are kind of part of the unspoken realities of the way that work works that we all covet. Things like we want to be able to bring our best selves to work. We want to have our dignity intact. We want to come to work with our dignity intact, leave with our dignity intact. We want to have rich opportunities for enrichment in the workplace and for promotional opportunities, for advancement, for recognition. So when all of those kinds of variables are in place, we find our way to be more connected to work, more interested in the workplace, more safe and secure. And now we have a better shot at becoming engaged. So all DEI, in my view, especially the D and the I part, maybe not the E, but the diversity and inclusion work really is the pursuit of engagement, recognizing that the way that marginalized employees sometimes find their way on this path toward engagement is laden with burden assigned to them by narratives that are not of their own doing, choices that are not of their own making. And so I think it is the best organization, the best employers that really will begin to understand that. And then, of course, racial equity, thinking about that in the context of economics and in the context of workforce development, I think are ways to talk about this so that you can kind of get yourself out of this right thing to do thing and this, with business imperative that doesn't really have a dollar figure attached to it. So it's easier to attach it to what's already in play. What's already in play. People are already talking about this stuff. Just attach DEI to that, because that's really, in my view, what it is.
Yeah, because you mentioned that. I want to find, it was something you said earlier. Oh gosh, where was that? When you were talking about how to best embed this in the work. We were talking about how women, people of color, members of the LGBTQ community feel beleaguered in doing this work. So how would you suggest companies embed the work so that everyone has a piece of this?
So I'm going to push on that a little bit because I'm not sure that everyone at the same time can have a piece of it. The other worry I have sometimes is that with DEI, we are super busy trying to be all things to all people. And I am heartened by organizations that are taking the time to be very thoughtful about the pacing of how they will approach the work ahead of them. And that depends on, you have to have a pretty acute understanding of what your current state is before you can really start embarking on this to-be state. As an example, the Federal Reserve. For the last 6 months, we have recently embarked on a racial equity assessment within the Federal Reserve system, within the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. And we did so starting with Black employees. And it's a 5-year play, right? So it is, how do we think about the most marginalized minority group inside of the workforce that we have today? And arguably one of the more consequential, because we know that we will need stickiness, retention with Black and Brown in the years to come. So if it is the case that the majority of our minority workforce right now is Black, then we would do well to really understand the Black lived experience. And quite frankly, if we could figure that out and the way that marginalization and diminution help surfaces with regard to the Black lived experience at work, then that will help us assign new choices, behaviors, and belief system to the way that marginalization and diminution, am I saying that right, shows up with everybody else. So we embarked on this study to help us understand, like, what does code switching really mean? And how often do people feel like they have to do that? Why is it the case, now that we're starting to pay attention, that some of our performance reviews, we see that Black employees are held accountable more often than not for the way that others perceive them versus the actual work product? That happens more with people of color. We didn't realize that before. What is it about the public criticism, private praise that tends to happen more with our minorities of color? Had we not even thought about asking specific questions relative to the realities that are facing our Black employees, we never would have known that that was a thing. And so I think employers would do well to kind of move away. I'm not saying abandon or jettison, but in addition to your employee engagement surveys that you probably are already doing, your employee engagement assessments of some that really do help us understand how does the overall employment experience show up for employees by and large. If you were to unpack that by race, gender, or any other group that's important in your demography within the workplace and really do a deep dive, I bet it would be fairly illuminating. It's a bold step and there is risk, absolutely. So if you are with an organization that has zero risk appetite, I don't know what to tell you, because you have to be able to absorb some level of risk in this work, but it's risk toward remedy. And I'm with my work that I'll be doing in my new life, I have some thoughts on how to help sometimes our general counsels get past some of the worry around pacing and sequencing work by segmented groups and what many believe to be legal exposure for that. So anyway, I have some help I can lend on that.
Well, I really want to make sure I ask you about your new role that you're going to take on at the end of the year. But there are a few more questions. The chat is really blowing up here. Let me find this question. When you were talking about the racial stress, and I'm familiar with that SHRM survey, there's a statement and a question here. It's amazing that they've started to quantify racial stress in monetary terms in the workplace. How are employers taking and using that information? Are they connecting it with the bottom line? And can Black professionals help that process?
Yeah, so I actually don't have a sense for that. So I can tell you that we are at the Federal Reserve, and the employers with whom I will be working in my new life will be, because I will be bringing this data to bear in furtherance of the work. So I'd love to hear maybe from some of the other folks represented in the boxes, and maybe some of our other speakers later on, the extent to which their workplaces are relying on this kind of data. And it is fairly newly captured data with this level of granularity and specificity, but it's potent nonetheless. And I think, it could be fairly instructive as we're looking to carve out new ways of thinking and talking about this work.
What's interesting, because I use those numbers when talking to journalists, because same scenario in the journalism industry. And we report these numbers, our news organizations report these numbers all the time, but they never take it into account in their own workplaces. So it's so illuminating and much needed for corporate America to really understand the toll that this type of stress takes on people of color. Another question, if the fact that the US will have more brown people is the imperative for change amongst other things, how do we counteract the argument that countries like South Africa, where Black and brown people are 85% of the workplace, are still marginalized and it's business as usual?
We're in the top 2 of the world's most formidable economies. Our G7 footing, unlike some of these other countries, is well settled and established. And so just to maintain our current economic footing and our current stronghold as an economic powerhouse, and the value of the dollar, the weight and the credibility of our firms and our ability to offshore, all of that presumes a certain level of economic vibrancy and health. that we have become accustomed to in our country. And so my argument is the maintenance of that reality requires a shifting of our ideology and our support systems and strategies to assure an embracing of and an activating of our Black and Brown talent. Now, that presumes that that is the collective desire, that we want to at least maintain and grow where we are as a country from our economic footing. If that's not the desire, then that's an entirely different argument. It's an entirely different reality than I think that we have to be ready to face. But I think, we've never seen a time in our country where we haven't had to rely on white people to sustain the economic well-being of this country, primarily, not exclusively. And so that changes entirely after 2045, and arguably is changing slowly now, but by 2045 is when we'll really start to feel the effects of that. And so I think it could be a daunting premise for us to think about how do we become something in 24 years that we haven't been able to realize ever by way of real, meaningful economic inclusion. And yet that's the only choice that we have if our desire is to maintain our current standing.
I have time for one question, and then I have one question myself. So we only have 5 minutes. Okay.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
I'll
do it. Okay.
The last question is, what has been your experience or approach? I don't know if you can answer this in 2 minutes or less, but what has been your experience or approach to navigating those minds that are new to DEI and support the D&I, but feel that E is a victim mindset and doesn't support unity?
Yeah. So I can't answer that in 2 minutes. It would take me probably an hour to get through that. But I will say this. So in my new world, I will be part of what I'll be offering is like assistance and coaching support and support in general to particularly those that are new to the DEI practitioning space. Recognizing though that I am not a DEI practitioner, I'm a racial equity strategist that is informed by macroeconomics and my legal practice and my HR work. But I do have a point of view that some might find helpful and furtherance of their work that I'd love to help folks with. And there is, a lot of this could be easily regarded as zero-sum game. We have to pick winners and losers with racial equity or DEI, and nothing could be further from the truth. So I'd love to have a conversation maybe offline with whomever might have shared that, and perhaps could give some assistance to them as they're growing in their practice.
Well, one thing I want to say, you say you're not a DEI specialist. I will tell you, you are far more qualified than a lot of people who are in this space. You have the credentials, you are doing the work, you are studying the subject. So really just tell us more about Harper Slade and the type of work you'll be taking on.
So let me just say this. Thank you for that, Felicia. I appreciate that endorsement. So this is the work that I'll be taking on, is really helping organizations understand the urgency, but assigning to that urgency a certain level of sophistication around the way we approach racial equity in the workforce and what that has to do with not only their betterment, the organization's betterment, what that then unlocks with the employees, the Blacker and Browner employees that they will be courting and securing and amplifying. But then what does that mean in terms of their role as a corporate citizen and as a contributor to the overall economy? I came to this work though, almost with, my parents were very involved in the civil rights movement, violently so both of them very violently so. And so last year for me was, I know, it was hard for everybody, but for me last year, a lot of praying and fasting and asking God to help me understand what exactly I'm supposed to do with this assignment that has been given to me somewhat in utero. And that is helping to get us closer, Black people specifically, get us closer to this post-slavery promise. It's so elusive, this idea of us mattering and being able to traverse this world without context or asterisk or a parenthetical reference that then gives license to our worth and our value. But just being able to be presumed valuable and intellectual and potent and wonderful. That's the world that I want. And I want to fold myself into the ecosystem of the many people, many of whom are represented in these boxes, who are doing the work already, who are doing this work. I just want to be a part of this tapestry and help out as best as I can. So that's, I'm moving into this world full time after January, and I'm very excited about it and very much looking forward to having more conversations with all of you all. And I can't thank Hutch enough for the audiences that he's given me already on so many of these topics. It's just a wonderful family that I'm finding my place in as I'm moving into this new career.
Well, we are very excited and have been blessed to hear from you today. And I just want to end this with a comment that's in the chat. And I just thought it was so amazing. It says, I am on the edge of my seat. In the world of banking, Miss Nikki Lanier is the Shakespeare of finance and racial equity.
Hey, Felicia, we were just in the back room in production, and we have just been so engaged with what we've been hearing from Nikki, and we know there's some other questions. So we have, I went into the line as the quarterback and we made an audible. So we're gonna let this conversation go for a couple more questions. So we'll take about another 6 or 7 minutes. So go ahead.
Okay. I wonder, I know there was that question, you said you didn't have enough, we really didn't have enough time to discuss. Let me go back to that. Well, here's one, another question. Do you have any idea where I could find a copy of the bank charter for Freedman Savings Bank? The current Federal Reserve location is the site of the Freedman Savings Bank. This is our equity unpaid or denied.
Yikes. I don't know. What I need to know which Federal Reserve jurisdiction maybe they fall in. So if I don't know if maybe they can email me. I'd just be interested in what district they fall under, and I maybe can start there. I'm happy to chase that down if we have any view of where that might be, but I need to know which bank. There's 12 banks across the United States, and they all have different like jurisdiction areas. So I don't know.
Well, let me ask you this. You talked about how the Federal Reserve is really dealing with rooted racism. Has the Federal Reserve Bank always been focused on race and equity?
No, good Lord, no. No. So, okay, so let me just give you a quick overview of the Fed. So the Federal Reserve Bank, of course, is your central bank. We set monetary policy for the United States, and we establish common currency. We assure that there are reserves somewhere. We always have reserves. We hold money for other banks and money for other governments and money for other central banks. So in furtherance of all of that work, we study economics and economic well-being incessantly. So our job is what we call the dual mandate. So we have to make sure that prices are stable so that inflation doesn't get out of whack. And we have to make sure that employment is fairly viable so that we look at like employment numbers. So usually we look at inflation and we want it to be around 2% inflation. And then we look at unemployment and we're looking at maybe like 2 to 3% unemployment is what we try to balance against. And so all of the variables that go into productivity and output, GDP have a lot to do with how we think about inflation, and then how people find their way in and out of work, how people prepare for work, move through work, all that has a lot to do with how we think about unemployment. And so we monitor all of that and we pay attention to all of that. And we have, especially at the St. Louis Fed, we've had a focus on, what happens in what we call LMI communities, low and moderate income communities, probably since we enacted, or the Congress enacted the remedies that we're trying to address redlining. So anyway, so there's a lot that we've always looked at kind of in a segmented but very microeconomic rooted way around how demographics impact the way people find work and find their place in work, how demographics fold into the way people consume, discretionary dollars that people have within households to consume. We looked at healthcare dynamics and what does it mean to have access to, like, food deserts, access to meaningful healthcare, transportation, agriculture systems. We look at all of that stuff in terms of how people find their way toward healthy living, healthy meaning in a broader context. But it wasn't really until maybe within the last 5 years that certain of our banks started exploring more and more the link between inequity and its manifestations in just about every construct of American life. So like everything, the way we are educated, the way we enjoy or experience protections by the law, criminal justice standards, healthcare, jobs, employment. So how you shop, where you shop, how you eat, what you eat, all of that has so much to do with oftentimes choices that are available versus choices that are made. And so we're coming more and more acutely aware of that. And so you've seen over the last several years, you have the Bank of Minneapolis, Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Of course, now we've got our first Black president at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And now with the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, where I work, you're seeing propped up more and more studies at the macro level around, whoops, wait a minute, this race thing and this inequity thing impacts everything. Like it impacts every single thing. And so they haven't really been studying it. And in their defense, most of the Federal Reserve is led by economists. And so our economists really just don't have the tools or the systems or the structures in their academic rooting and their academic preparedness to help them understand or even think about race in the context of macroeconomic theory. There's no instruments that help us understand how to quantify the cost of that. And so economists just, if we dealt with it, we just dealt with it as a macro issue that was more about the local economy and not necessarily a large economy. So sorry, it took me 35 years to get that answer out.
That's okay. It's a complicated issue. And to that question about the Freedman Bank, that was the bank in DC that was set up in 1868.
Oh, the Freedmen's Bank, yeah. So they're looking for the actual charter document.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'd have to go to okay. I still would love an email, maybe if I don't know who's
going to suggest, what's the best way that people can contact you, Nikki?
Well, I could put it in the chat, but it's my email. I'll just give you my new one. So it's nikkiL@harperslade.com.
And it's NIKKIL
at harperslade.com.
Awesome. There's one. How much time do I have? Because there's a interesting question here.
5 more minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. I think this could be answered in 5 minutes. What are your thoughts on critical race theory being banned in school districts? Will that have a long-term effect on DEI in the workplace as our children get into the corporate workforce?
Listen, I wish I could do this in 5 minutes. Let me just say this. I cannot understand, except for racism, why we don't teach the fullness of Black history in schools. Whether you call it critical race, I don't care what you call it, the reality and the fulsome experience of the Black experience in this country is American history, should be taught in schools. My opinion, not attributable to the Fed. But let me tell you why that's important. So when we talk about things like reparations or even racial equity, we do it with white people largely in the construct of, let me say this differently. When white people hear that, for the most part, it's hard for them to hear arguments around remedial-based work regarding race without understanding the full context giving rise to the remedy. Like, why do you need a remedy if whatever's wrong with you in the community happened 400 years ago, and whatever still remains to be wrong is of your doing? It is your choice. You keep making bad choices. So unless we really understand what has happened and continues to happen and the cumulative impact of that, it's hard for majority folks, most people who have no view of the atrocities that have happened and what's been passed to us by way of trauma and some of the wrongs that need to be righted. It's hard to hear about any of the work that lies ahead without feeling as though we're just asking for a handout or something that's not deserving. So, I think context setting in some ways, however we find that to happen, is going to be very, very important in the years to come. Teaching Black history, the fulsome, well, I saw something on Facebook that said, the problem with slavery and those kinds of things, we talk about that as though it was Black history and not white history. That's not, we didn't do that, they did it. So it really should be taught as white American history. But I digress. But anyway, so it's important, I think, for our overall society to understand the full backdrop upon which this DEI racial equity work rests, especially if you're going to cast it in the context of remedial work. We have to remedy, we have to fix, we have to repair. And so, people are like, repair what? Fix what? Like in a sweeping way. So when you don't understand all of the systems and the structures that were intentional impediments and the lingering impact of that, it really is hard to understand why this work today is so acutely important.
Yes, absolutely. And I know we are coming upon time. I would suggest there are a few more really good questions in the chat. I would suggest that you put your email address in the chat.
Yeah.
Nikki will be reading this, and that way she can contact you directly. This has been such a powerful, powerful hour. I know you could talk about this another hour and we'd have even more questions, but I've really been blessed today to be the moderator of this program, of this session, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you more in the future, Nikki.
Thank you so much. And thank you all. I appreciate your engagement. I'm sticking around for the rest of it, so I'm eager to stay connected with you.
Okay, everyone. I have to tell you, we've gotten out to a great start, with Nikki Lanier. This whole issue about diversity, equity, and inclusion has so many different angles to it, so many different implications and perspectives. And the context that she put things in for all of us, it really is going to be one of the key issues going forward for any type of ability for our country to achieve a true, just, and equitable society. So really want to thank Nikki for her presentation and really great questions that came from you, the audience. And so matter of fact, it was going so well that we had a break built in, and we decided that the momentum was so great and the engagement was so high that we did not want to stop. And so we kept it going. And so we're going to go right into our next presentation. And so we have our second panel coming up. And so we're going to start them just a couple of minutes early as well, which will give us the opportunity to make sure that if we need some additional time for them, because we don't want to have you walking away feeling that you didn't get a chance to get your questions answered or get the fullness of the knowledge and the resource that our speakers are bringing to the table for us here today. So I'm going to now turn this over to Denise, and she will prepare us for the next.
Sounds good, Hutch. Thank you. And hello again, everyone. So welcome to the second session of the BPM DEI Conference and Award, Striking While We're Hot. I'm Denise Kegler, the co-founder of Black Professionals Month. My primary role is founder and principal of MDK Brand Management, a firm I founded in 2015, following about 25 years working in corporate. Now, I held senior, executive, and C-suite roles at small and large companies, including Reebok, Adidas Group, Boston Scientific, and Nintendo. I'm now dedicated to pouring everything I learned, everything I experienced during those 25 years into helping my clients step up, stand out, and break through. And yes, it sounds familiar. I was very, very pleased and happy to extend that declaration to Black Professionals Month. So my company's services include brand consulting, business consulting, and career coaching. And I'm very happy that we just launched our new website, mdkbrandmanagement.com, last week. So if you get a chance, please go check it out, and also check out a copy of my book, $40 and a Brand, How to Overcome Challenges, Defy the Odds, and Live Your Awesomeness. Now, speaking of awesomeness, we are so pleased to bring you this awesome panel in just a couple of moments. And so let's just jump right into the reason that you guys are here. So again, as Hutch has mentioned before, please stay muted, turn your camera off until you are ready to speak. Okay, so let's get right to the panel. Striking while we are hot. We are going to soon, you're going to meet the panel and the moderator, two exceptionally talented panelists, Black leading professionals. And the panel is going to be moderated by another exceptional Black leading professional. So let's get right to his introduction. Barry Callender is going to be moderating this next session. So let me introduce Barry to you. I'm going to read his bio here. Barry Callender is an executive coach in Korn Ferry's advisory practice with a focus on leadership development and diversity, equity, and inclusion. As an executive coach, he serves clients in a variety of industries, including technology, healthcare, and consumer products. He leads a team of coaches in a firm practice that focuses on leaders from underrepresented groups. As a DE&I strategist, he works with client executive teams in a variety of industries throughout the Americas, Europe, and Asia to develop diversity and inclusion strategies that align with their talent management and organizational strategies. Prior to joining Korn Ferry, Mr. Callender managed a variety of operations and staff functions within the United Parcel Service, including the corporate office's training and development function. Barry holds a BA from Syracuse University and an MBA from the Western Kentucky University. He is certified as a master coach by the Behavioral Coaching Institute and is a certified practitioner of the HBDI, Hogan, and VISC DISC instruments. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn this session over to our moderator, Mr. Barry Callender. Barry.
Good morning. Thank you, Denise, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. All right, well, let me jump right in. So our first panelist is Brianna Boyer. She's a Senior Vice President, Diversity and Inclusion and Multicultural Strategy at Hasbro. She leads initiatives to foster a more diverse workforce while ensuring that the company derives growth from the multicultural consumer. She has led the execution of the company's first ever performance-based diversity and inclusion goals to cultivate a successful and sustainable business for the future. Ms. Boyer began her Hasbro career in 1995, serving in a variety of roles in both the global brand and global consumer products team. Through licensing, she played an integral role in expanding the company's iconic brands, from taking the My Little Pony brand into more than 70 countries and to growing the Transformers product portfolio to deliver over $12 billion in retail sales since 2014. Ms. Boyer currently serves on the board of the Charlton College of Business at the University of Massachusetts in Dartmouth. She is also a trustee for the Community College of Rhode Island and a member of the Women in Toy Association's Diversity Committee. The organization recognized her for her branding and promotional expertise. Ms. Boyer received both her Bachelor of Science degree in marketing and an honorary doctorate from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, and received her MBA from Bryant University. Welcome, Brianna.
Thank you.
All righty. Our second panelist, Dr. Theoria Kaysen, is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager for Gulfstream Aerospace Corporation. She is responsible for the development and integration of Gulfstream's global DEI strategy, which aims to hire and develop diverse talent, foster an inclusive work environment, and ensure management accountability. She managed the launch of Gulfstream's first employee resource group for African American and Black employees, and established a framework of policy and practices to systematize future employee resource groups. She also serves as an eCornell facilitator for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Certificate Program. Prior to Gulfstream, Dr. Kaysen served as the inaugural Senior Training and Education Consultant for the Office of Institutional Equity and Title IX at Cornell University. An entrepreneur, Dr. Kaysen is also the founder and chief executive officer of a consulting firm, Theoria in Praxis, Inc. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, a master's in college student personnel from Western Illinois University, and a doctor of education in higher education management from the University of Pittsburgh. Welcome, Theoria.
Thank you, Barry.
All righty. So let's jump right in. The topic is striking while we're hot. I'd like to hear from both of you. As we all know, the job market for Blacks and African Americans in particular has been front and center since the George Floyd murder. Your perspective in terms of why you think the market is hot and why are organizations reacting to that event in particular? Let's start with, let's go with Brianna.
All right. So first of all, I just want to say welcome and good morning, and congrats to Hutch and Denise. Denise, I've known for quite some time. I'm not surprised that she would actually take on this initiative in such a significant way. Hutch, I've just recently met, but I can see the combination of the two of you and the work that you're doing is amazing. And I think as we talk about leveraging the market and keeping it hot, I think this is actually the way that you keep it hot, is that we as a collective can those moves forward. I'd also just like to say amazing to Nikki. Wow, I'll be in touch. It's interesting. DE&I, that work is it's like an onion. Every time you peel it, there's something else to hear and learn and see. And to the audience who are here, have taken time out of their month, their week, their day, their Saturday morning to listen. And I think that's really key. So congratulations to you as well. To answer your question, Barry, in terms of, will the market be hot and will it continue? It's an interesting question, and I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't know. What I do know, however, is that we can keep it relevant simply by the way that we take this approach. I think it's an individual approach, but it's also a collective. It's also working inside of your corporations to ensure that the goals that they have laid down are long-term in nature. And how do you move away from this term hot, but more sustainable growth over time? And when we look at businesses that are now really very much interested in DE&I, and we know this, by the way, with some facts. We know, for example, that LinkedIn, I was on a panel the other day, and they mentioned that the search and the jobs related to DE&I is like 4 times what it was back in 2019, between 2019 and today. So we know that it's real. I think the question is, are those companies looking at this as a trendy thing to do, or do they have long-term goals that are sustainable? Because it isn't just about getting us into the companies, it's how do we do this over time? What are the strategies in place to ensure that you get those promotions, that you feel like you belong? And then we have a responsibility as well to ensure that we're lifting everybody up. So it isn't just you as the individual, but what are we doing collectively once you're inside the organization to make sure that your Black boss, your Black colleague, that your Black employee, that collectively we are lifting? Because there's a term that I love to use, which is all boats rise. If we make this work, all boats rise, and we will maintain that heat over time.
Great, thank you. Theoria.
Thank you. So I would like to just echo all of Brianna's sentiments. I feel very strongly and passionately about my appreciation and gratitude for the opportunity to participate in this panel and to be just an inaugural member of the movement for Black Professionals Month. I'm very much looking forward to participating in an annual rotation. That said, I want to connect some dots because I think that Brioni set a fantastic stage that in my mind connects some of the dots from what Nikki shared with us. So one of the things that really struck out to me, Brioni, when you were speaking, was a point that Nikki made earlier in her presentation. And for those of you who were not there, one of the many gems that she dropped, right, is that, in the next 24 years, the demographics of our workforce is going to be primarily Black and Brown, right? And so as an educator, a person who was trained to work with college students, I'm thinking about our multi-generational workforce. One of the points that Nikki also made is that we need to bifurcate the way we're educating people about diversity, equity, and inclusion now. And so that the folks who are more seasoned in their career, because they've been working longer, have a different disposition and understanding of the relevance for diversity, equity, and inclusion that perhaps is not as passionate as folks that we would consider Generation Z. And so those are the folks who are currently in the workforce, but they're in their like mid-20s, right? So if we think about the mid-20-year-old employee who in 24 years will be in many of those decision-making seats because they'll be in their early 50s, we need to be really intentional about capitalizing on the passion and the lack of inclination to wait for inclusion and equity. And so to contextualize my comment, Barry, you asked us about considering the hotness of our relevance in the workplace in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. One of the things that we all had the opportunity to witness was this inclusive and comprehensive and global response to the disdain for the way that Black people are being treated inequitably, and the inability to deny that equity. And so what I would offer to the point of Brioni's call for sustainability is that we need to really think about this current generation of employees and really fan the fire that they are bringing to the workplace to make sure that the convictions for inclusion and equity are sustainable, but also that people have a true comprehensive understanding of where we need to prioritize our efforts. And so I would highly encourage you to go back and listen to the recording if you missed it. And even if you were here, because Nikki dropped some really fantastic gems about the future of work and our economy. And if you tack that on to the call that I'm making for the generational consideration of how we can be really strategic in our approach to affect change, you will lay a strong foundation for your efforts if you are a person who's doing this work currently.
Great, thank you. This wasn't in the script, but you just very nicely shared with us differences that you're seeing in generations and our behavior in the workplace. So could you expound on that a little bit if you were going to have a chat with us, a real talk chat with us? What are you seeing differently in terms of how generations of Black people are showing up in the workplace?
Sure, I think that there have, and understandably so, if you want me to have a real talk conversation with my experiences from some Black professionals in the workplace, there are more seasoned Black professionals that I've experienced who've had to take somewhat of a safer and more strategic approach just by virtue of the need to survive in the workplace. But through those practices, I think there's been some conditioning to be inclined to take a cautious approach to engaging in the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a cautious approach to the support of the need for change or to engage in initiatives that are currently happening in their workplace. And there are some more seasoned Black employees who are fearful of retribution because perhaps when they began their career, engaging and congregating and supporting the collective advancement of Black employees might have meant that everybody who was engaged in those initiatives and who was making those calls could lose their livelihood. And so I understand that sentiment. I don't want to invalidate those concerns because they are real, but I also want to offer the nuanced difference of some younger employees who are just showing up unapologetically Black. They're like, this is who I am. This is what I expect of you as an employer. And if you cannot create an environment that is inclusive, where I feel as though I can bring my full Black self to work, I'll go somewhere else, or I just won't work at all. And so I think that some of those differences at times might create opportunities for those Black employees to feel as if they need to choose how much they are willing to engage, if at all, with supporting our collective advancement.
Great, thank you.
Can I just add on to that a little bit, Barry Theoria? I'm just gonna, it's just a little bit of a nuance and slight tweak to what you're saying. I think in the past, and as recent, let's just go 10 years ago, there was this notion of you could be the only one at a certain level, right? And it's understandable. That's the sense that you got perhaps from a company. And so there was a tendency to say, I'm the only one, and therefore I'm not going to help you come up because I'm going to be, you might replace me. I think that's shifting. And I just want to keep going back to look at the companies that are writing goals that are external, they're published externally. And I'll just pick on Hasbro. We have externally published goals about what it is that we're trying to accomplish from a racial perspective and all levels of diversity, but very specifically KPIs. And it's not just having a certain percentage of racially diverse employees in the company, it's about at all levels. And almost by default, it means that we're starting to push away this notion of quote unquote the only one. We're encouraging now that we can have multiple levels of people. We need to have at the board level, at C-suite, at SVP, at all levels, across all aspects of the business. And so how are we helping each other collectively? So again, to your point, that was the old narrative. I think we can shift to a new narrative, and that is what we're now seeing coming out of I like to call it the crisis of 2020, right? How do we encourage this notion that that narrative is a little old, and we can kind of have a broader demographic of people like us in companies now.
Thank you. And while we're on that vein, thinking strategically for everyone on the call who might want to see themselves as a viable candidate, what would you say employers are looking for, if there's anything different, if you will, in terms of how people show up as viable candidates today? Brianni, I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. And I think for the audience, at the end of, I'm going to start someplace interesting. I suspect that right now, in particularly the US, but it's not limited to the US, we all know that if you're Black and talented, you're sort of high in demand. I think you have to now come to the table. That will get you the interview. Your capabilities is really what will get you the job. So you get to interview stage, but you still have to land the capabilities. So I think we all have to understand, what are those new things that are happening in the marketplace, those new functional areas, high in demand, like data management as an example, IT, technology, those kinds of things, brand management, and how we, because it's first about your capability. And then secondly, oh, by the way, right, you happen to be Black. That's how I want to be known. I'm an amazing DE&I expert, or I'm an amazing brand management expert, or whatever it is. The other thing that we have to learn how to do is to reframe our capabilities into the new job. So, and I'll pick on our industry. Our industry right now is somewhat homogeneous. And so if we as a company are only looking for people who have experience, let's just say in the toy industry or the gaming industry, and that industry in itself is homogeneous, and it means we got to look outside to find capabilities that can sort of switch into what we're trying to do. And interestingly, it's those capabilities, by going outside of the industry, I think that's actually where the uniqueness comes in. Because what we're finding is by bringing people in from other parts of the world, and we're willing to take, I'm not even going to call it a risk because it's not, willing to accept that the capability is really what we're going after. All this other stuff, the functional stuff, you can learn that. Sort of the way your brain works, your ability to think strategically, et cetera, and how to translate it into the business that makes the difference. Those folks who are now coming in with those different capabilities are now sort of being heralded as the innovation in the company. And that's key. And oh, by the way, they happen to be brown or black or whatever it is. That's an interesting sort of way of looking at it.
Good.
Pass it over to Hillary.
And I would add, and I'll use myself as an example. I did what Brioni suggested, which was reflected on my transferable skills as an educator. I spent the first 10 years of my career in higher ed. Once I decided that I wanted to go into the corporate space, I said, how can I rebrand these skills? Because the skills are the skills that I've developed and they're valuable. And I know that I can add value in a different industry. And so I rebranded my skills in such a way that it would be appealing to a different type of employer. And I did not do that alone. I hired myself a career coach, specifically look for a Black woman, if I'm going to be honest. And I had conversations with her about any self-imposed narratives that I might have been thinking about my ability to pivot and transition into a new career. And she gave me the tools and resources that I simply just did not know existed to figure out how to represent the abilities that I've been cultivating throughout my career, but in a different industry, so that I could confidently go to another type of employer and say, this is the way that I can add value to your organization because I still have 10 years of experience developing these skills. And because I bring that different perspective of an alternative industry, this is the way I would approach this work differently. And so I'll just supplement what you said there by using myself as an example. Sometimes we just have to get out of our own way with regards to self-imposing limitations about our capacity to pivot and transition, and reach out to other people who have some expertise that will give us honest feedback because they want us to win and thrive, simply so that we can reframe the package that we have to offer and then feel confident in our ability to go into those spaces and make demands for what we want because we understand the value that we're bringing to those organizations.
Great, thank you. And to both of your points, that's really critical. If an organization is looking for someone with 20 years experience in the industry, that could discount a lot of us, right? So the ability to articulate how your skills are transferable, regardless of a lack of industry experience, is really critical. Good. And Theory, I would add to the work that you have done that there have been studies that have shown that when jobs are posted, women will only post for the job if they see themselves in 90 to 95% of the qualifications, but men will go after a job where they only hit 50% of the qualifications. 30. So, well, that's lower now, huh? Yeah, so we really need to be courageous in terms of stepping up and taking advantage of the opportunities. Good. Yes.
Barry, I want to build on that point if I have time. I think I was talking to a consultant once, we talked a little bit about that. And that didn't just happen because of nature. Mm-hmm. It wasn't because we were born that way. It's based on
recording in progress.
It's based on signals that women have been sent, right? They stepped out of their quote unquote comfort zone and weren't. And so other women sort of look into it and feed it. And so the question becomes, in a company, how do we reset the signal? You say to your colleague, hey, by the way, I just saw that job. You might want to go after it. Have to be deliberate about changing that narrative because it's a learned behavior over time based on signals that have been sent by others.
Okay, so all things ebb and flow. Any thoughts in terms of how we should keep an eye on the job market in case the notion of we need to have much more diverse representation, should that ever start to recede, if you will?
Are you asking?
Theoria?
Gary?
All right. Let me think about this question. I mean, one of the things that I think has been really critical to my transition from one industry to the next is really being intentional in learning more about that industry. Again, I come from a place of educating, trying to educate myself and others. And so there are a myriad of resources that are accessible to us on the internet if only we just sit down and begin to do just a little bit of research, and or take advantage of common social phenomenons like participating in discourse on Clubhouse in the professional spaces, or listening to podcasts, for example. It helped me a great deal during the pandemic to start listening to podcasts through Harvard Business Review or Wall Street Journal, study the trends in industry during the pandemic and look at what some of the experts were projecting about where the job market might pivot very broadly, and trying to figure out the type of organization that would align with my values as I made the transition to do this work full time. And so I'll pause there.
I'm going to come at it from a different angle, complement what you're saying, Theoria. I'm going to think about what Nikki was talking about in terms of putting this in context of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And she mentioned a bunch of different ways that she could do that. The way that I've done it, and I'll say I on purpose, is to connect it to, if you're a consumer products company, it's about the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, in our world, our consumer is 18 and under. They're kids. Kids are already 50% diverse.
Mm-hmm.
So 50% white, and the rest of the 50% is made up of, Black and brown. And so training the company and making leaders see the business opportunity. And we did this very deliberately. We organized it by brand because we understand who's buying into our products and we understand who's not. And so lining that up with a strategic plan, and again, I had the advantage of coming out, so I transitioned from brand marketing. So I knew as a brand, or a series of brands, where we're trying to go from a revenue perspective. And there's a bunch of different ways to grow revenue. And the biggest one is to add more consumers to your business. And the only way that you understand those consumers, or you get that consumers to understand what the nuances are. And oh, by the way, you then tie that back to workforce. So we say we need to understand and ensure that our workforce reflects the population that we serve, because only then can you develop product marketing, content, etc., to serve that consumer and therefore drive your revenues. If you, as a DE&I practitioner or just a person inside of a company, keep that narrative going, then there really can be no reason that we shouldn't remain relevant, right? Because at the end of the day, particularly, and every company is going after consumers, and we know the consumer is browning. Therefore, we have to be there to ensure that we're delivering product. And that's a construct in which I believe we have to speak. Because again, it's the right thing to do. And I heard a guy at Procter P&G that coined this phrase. He said, it's a force, DE&I is a force for good and a force for growth. If you've got a company that is focused on future growth, knowing full well that by 2060, we will be 65% brown and 35% white, then your workforce better reflect that. And that's the conversation you have to ensure that you maintain DE&I, as far as I'm concerned, forever. I don't think it goes away. It can't.
I would add, because I like the way that you framed that. However, working at a company such as Gulfstream, if we were to wait for our consumers to be the drivers for the impetus for change, we would be waiting a very, very long time. Right?
Yeah.
Because a critical mass of our customers are not individual buyers, their corporations and government contracts, and perhaps international, and just like individually, like affluent. But one of the strategic points that I am trying to ground some of our initiatives in are the point that you made about the need to diversify our workforce and at all levels. And I can say that a critical mass of the work that I do might not ever be shared publicly because of the culture of the company that I work for, and also because there's a common understanding that the work that we need to do has to do with our employee workforce, because our customers and the market are not going to demand that we have a high priority for these diverse initiatives at any point. It's not essential. Like, we have emerged from the pandemic very strongly, irrespective of any current initiatives. And quite frankly, there's a real lack of representation for the initiatives that we have going on. And so the point that Nikki made as well, but she didn't quite use this framing, if we are considering the capitalistic environment that we're situated in, from a bottom line, my corporation literally has no incentive to do anything different, because we're still making a critical mass of money. However, there is a high value on innovation. And so people do understand that the value of, there's a strong value in diversifying the perspectives of the people who are doing the work, so that we can continue to be leaders in the industry.
You're right, Theoria. I think every company has a different construct. So I was really pushing on the point of leveraging a capitalistic construct. For us, it's one of them is a consumer. For you, it might be, listen, at the end of the day, in 30 years, your workforce is going to be diversified regardless, or millennials are expecting to see an inclusive environment, and they're not going to stay if they don't. So it might vary from company to company, but just trying to find what is that capitalistic view that might meet that industry, I think is important.
Thank you. What advice do both of you have for candidates, again, or employees, in terms of making sure that they get timely critical feedback, having sponsors? As we all know, one key to advancing in any organization is that you have the right people advocating for your development and advancement, or even if you're not culturally aligned with your organization. And I'll start with Briani. Any thoughts? What advice would you give us?
Yeah, I think somebody made the point. We have to look at each of these groups sort of differently. So if I'm looking at Black employees, Hispanic employees, Asian employees, white employees, you look at them differently, but yet you look at them as a collective. Nikki made the point about engagement, and interestingly enough, although my title says DE&I, I also own the employee experience and I own talent acquisition, because those three things are like that. So we've got to look at it as a collective. So in terms of talent, I think, first of all, ensuring that our overall talent management system is inclusive. And it isn't just it isn't just the conversation, it's the systems as well that we lay down, and how we select talent, and then how you then train them has to have an inclusive lens. And you can't just say it, you have to test it constantly at the collective. On top of that, we then have to recognize that there might be what we call differential training that might be needed, or leadership development that might be needed for underrepresented groups, even though I hate that terminology, but that's just for the conversation. So what are we doing for women? What are we doing for African Americans? Do they need sponsors? Do they need coaches? What we have to be, my opinion, very careful of is that we don't do what we call a sheep dip, meaning every African American or every Hispanic or every female goes through the same program, all different, right? We've got to look at the talent, understand the capabilities that are required for the company, ensure that we are calibrating everybody through that same lens, understanding that those gaps are once you've identified that great talent, and then what is it that that individual needs, almost custom, because there's a little bit of a danger to say, just because we're all Black, we all need the same thing. We all need something, but different. And having that desire and that discipline to really tune into the individual and understanding what they need, I think it becomes really key.
I'll pick up and add where you left off, because I think all of the initiatives that you mentioned there, Brioni, accountability for the decision makers has to be factored into that process, because we can create all types of management development programs, but if we don't hold the decision makers to some level of accountability and calibrating and making sure that they are in fact aligning with the espoused values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, then we will inevitably continue to find ourselves in the predicament where decision makers are offering logical explanations for the lack of change, right? They're just simply legitimate. All of those flowery, colory ways that they use terminology to mask the internalized racism, whether it's like conscious or unconscious biases that inform the decisions that they make. But then also to speak specifically to advice for audience members, I always approach the nature of the work that I do within an organization like with a foundational, like strategic goal for what I want to get out of my experience. And so I think that sometimes employees approach the relationship with their employer through this linear lens of gratitude. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity. I'm so appreciative of, what the company is doing for me, and completely fail to include in the conversation from the beginning and throughout the value that they are bringing to the organization. And so I think it's really critical for individual employees to remember that, but also to align themselves collectively within organizations as well. So one that is like a strategic approach is remembering the value that you add, being very intentional when presented with opportunities to take on more responsibilities, because it's always framed as an opportunity. To ask yourself, like, what's in it for me? Because clearly, if the company is presenting you with this opportunity, they've already assessed the way that you will add value to their goals. So you need to have some clear goals of your own, because I believe that relationships between employees and employers should always be reciprocal. If the nature of your relationship with your employer is parasitic, as in such that they are getting more out of you than what you are getting from being an employee within that organization, you need to reassess the relationship that you have with that individual employer, but also comprehensively perhaps redirect your framework for how you approach your relationship with an employer, generally speaking, but also understand that while you're working for someone, you're developing transferable skills that you can use for yourself. And so I also believe in pursuing like entrepreneurship. And it took me a little while to get on that vein, but like now that I'm on, I'm like, hey, wait a minute. This is the way I need to live comprehensively. So realizing that you can add value to someone else's organization, but add value to yourself. What kind of skills or talents or interests can you monetize such that you don't feel completely reliant on the organization where you are currently employed? I am very intentional when I introduce myself by saying I currently serve, because I don't ever want to get to a place where my mindset is so settled in tying my work and the skills and the values that I add to one singular organization. Because I know as an at-will employee, right, that organization can decide to sever its relationship with me at any point, but so can I. And so it's also important to remember that if we all choose to be in the same place to work towards a common goal, it is a consensual choice between all parties. And that in and of itself is an empowering disposition to bring to the work that you choose to do, whether it's for an organization or yourself or both.
Thank you. Ronnie, were you going to make another comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I'm looking at Denise because I can see her on the screen, and she teaches in her practice this notion of understanding your why. And I may frame it a little differently for this conversation. Being able to articulate that value like that sounds basic. Write it down, practice it, so that when you are in the conversation, in any way, shape, or form, it could just be a networking conversation, it could be a development conversation, just being able to articulate it so clearly and so crisply and with such belief, because you've, how many times have you walked away from a conversation going, oh my God, I should have said that. Doing it and feeling it is really, really powerful. And I just noticed in the chat, someone talked about the book, How Women Rise, which is the book that I read in an airport that made me change the direction in my career. You really should actually read that. And it speaks to just really being really many things, but back to this point, being really crisp about what you're asking, demonstrating why you're asking for it, and then knowing it internally. And the articulation of that is really key. Can't say that with any more emphasis. Really critical.
Yes. Okay. I think oftentimes the challenge is getting people to the starting line. So what advice would you give others in terms of self-promotion and networking? If you had to think about, I have to drag you just to get you to start thinking about it, what would you tell me? What encouragement might you offer so that I at least dip my toe in and start to figure out how I can self-promote? Theory, I'll start with you.
Sure. There are some internal affirmations that I have embraced and offer to all of the people in my community when they are going through the process of considering, pivoting in their careers or looking for another job. I wholeheartedly believe this, right? That I add value wherever I am simply because of who I am. And being very knowledgeable about the skills that I've developed. So to the point that Brioni just made, there's some internal reflection that you need to do in order to be able to crisply understand, these are the things that I'm capable of because I do and have done them with excellence all along. And I also have found it very liberating to walk in spaces without any bifurcation between my personal persona and my professional persona. I said this earlier in this panel, and I will say it again. I am unapologetically Black. Unapologetically Black. And I say that in front of my white colleagues, and it percolates their curiosity. And I welcome the questions about that because I'm also well equipped to help them understand why I can so confidently walk in those spaces and communicate that without it appearing as if it is a challenge. It is simply a statement of fact in my world. And so some of the advice that I will offer to the folks on this call is really learning how to embrace that level of cheerleading and championing for yourself, but also to be that for other people. Be other people's cheerleaders, be other people's coaches. I have a colleague that I consult with, and he says that he has a group of people whenever someone's interviewing for a job on their group chat, they service each other's hype man. So they have certain songs that they know will get their friends hype. They have certain words of affirmations and phrases that exist, between that group. We as Black people, I find, are very well equipped at distantly finding the value in others. We can say, okay, I see you, you got that, etc. when it's in a social environment, but we don't necessarily do that as freely in professional spaces. So bring that love into your professional networks and provide people feedback. When you have the opportunity to do so, if you are the only person that has a seat at the table, operate as a sponsor, operate as someone who can meet the names of others. If you have the opportunity to not only demonstrate through words your appreciation for the value that someone is adding, but get that person a seat at the table so that they can demonstrate themselves. mention their names, get them the opportunity, and then coach them on the side to say, hey, like, listen, this is what they are looking for. Here's how you can frame your asks to achieve your goals, but do so in a way that will be received by this particular audience. And so there has to be some internal strategic support that we extend to each other to share those unspoken rules that we are learning in these professional environments, so that other people can learn how to navigate these environments with confidence as well.
Great, thank you. Earlier, Theoria, you spoke to the difference amongst us generationally. There was a comment in the chat about how we might see ourselves and how others might see us, depending upon where we show up from. And so I'd be interested in if either of you have a perspective around different ways in which different Blacks may show up in the workplace. There was a question around, did I come here from one of our African nations? Was I raised in the Caribbean? My original experience been European, and now I'm in the States. And so amongst our own community, we have quite a bit of diversity. Does anything stand out for either of you as it relates to the diversity within our race?
That's a really complex.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're getting ready to go into Q&A. So if both of you could chew on that for a minute, maybe if something comes to you, please come back to us.
Whoever asks the question, I would welcome the opportunity for them to elaborate on their ask. But I will marinate on what you said, the way you framed it.
Yeah, same here. I'd love to understand the why behind the question.
Great, and perhaps it's far up the stream, but perhaps they'll come back to us. Good, alrighty. We do have a question around the power of resource groups. And I know, Theoria, you spent quite a bit of time building yours. Could you share with us some of the success stories from resource groups?
Sure, so I came from an organization that had resource groups. And so when I was presented with the opportunity to support the launch of this inaugural resource group at this company, I thought, wow, like this is the first one in the year of 2021. Okay, better late than never, I guess. One of the things that's interesting about Gulfstream's approach to including resource groups as part of its employee experience initiative is that it made the announcement to the company, we're going to do this, and the first one is going to be for Blacks and African Americans. And typically resource groups aren't formed that way. Often they happen a little more organically. Some of the successes that I've seen during my tenure supporting this particular group of employees is the evolution of their inclination to feel empowered to present themselves collectively, because the Gulfstream is a really conservative organization. And I think that there has been that the general culture within the organization is to pay people to focus on the tasks that they're hired to do. And for folks who are not aware, that Gulfstream it's a luxury manufacturing company, right? We make airplanes, fancy airplanes, beautiful private jets.
You're right.
Are a manufacturing company. So there are schedules that have to be met in order to deliver our product. And so I believe historically, the organizational culture has been to show up and to do the work you are hired to do. And so this group of people who came forward quite bravely, in my opinion, to say, yes, I want to work on this brand new thing that's never existed within this company before, is one, to see how they formed and shaped themselves into a group and into a very high functioning and high performing team that is already engaged in the community, but formally in some, representing the company very strategically, engaged in recruitment initiatives to try to attract and retain more Black employees at the collegiate level, but also with the intention to support recruitment of Black employees as direct hires. They are already developing fantastic professional development plans to support promotion readiness for Black employees within the company, such that when opportunities present themselves, folks know where to find those opportunities. They can feel empowered and prepared and coached up to go into those hiring panels with confidence. And so the people who came forward really capitalized on the opportunity to say, here are the gaps in our experience. We've already assessed these needs individually. How can we join our forces to work collectively to advance our causes in the company?
Thank you.
I happen to have about 13 networks that roll up to employee experience. And they've been around since networks were launched back in 2013. There are, across the board, as they typically are, women, pride, green, mosaic, which is one that sort of captures sort of racially diverse employees. And they do all the things that Theoria mentioned. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is to ensure we've got a sense of belonging in companies. And we know, as everybody said, belonging is sort of the other aspect of the D, the E, and the I. You may as well add the B. It's perhaps the foundation work that you do, regardless of your racial status, because if you don't feel like you belong in a company or to a team, you're gone, right? We leave our managers, we leave our teams really not our jobs, right? We go someplace else because we don't feel like we're being heard. And when the opposite happens, when you actually feel like you're heard and that your contributions matter, it gives you energy, and that energy then is a feedback loop. You give energy, which is value to the company, and back and forth we go. So all the right reasons that Theoria mentioned, these things are very, very important. The one piece that we've also added, we talked a little bit about multicultural strategy and ensuring that we've got the right balance of people, diverse people in the company. While we are working on that, we then leverage our ERGs to help as consultants on product, on marketing, on content, aggregate all of that information. So it's a and that we call kind of a mini BRG. And it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very casual, yet powerful, where we're looking at product and going, wait a minute, how does it end for you as an African-American or as a first generation African, because we have those as well. Or someone from the Pride Network or from the Women's Network. So that's an interesting way to leverage an employee resource group as a business resource group. So that's sort of the other play that's happening sort of in companies. So just building on Theoria's point.
I would love to see that in Gulfstream's future.
Yes, many organizations call them BRGs now for just that reason. There is a business objective, in part to have a good rationale for why we're investing resources in them in the first place, which is a whole nother story we could spend another hour discussing. Yes. Brianna, when we began, you discussed having goals around DE&I, and I'm wondering if, below the current, if you've heard any pushback from white employees in general or executives about, what is this? Are they quotas? Is this an unfair advantage for people of color? What's the noise behind all of this activity?
I would say generally it's positively received. We've had them since 2016. They're published, they're external to the company. Where sometimes it can get a little, that's what I'm looking for, touchy. Okay. Is when you actually start to put the practice in place. Goals are one thing, which are lovely. And the reason I decided to sort of shift over was to say, well, we published these goals, which is great, which, by the way, the diversity ERG at the time pushed the company to create goals, but that's a longer story. So fast forward, we now have the goals. The question is, how are we actually going to make it happen? How do we operationalize these things? And so sometimes, for example, we've got something that we call a diverse slate, interview slate. So 50% of the people in the US that are being hired have to be diverse. Otherwise, the interviews don't happen. So when those practical things start to happen, you can hear a little bit of the undercurrent about, well, wait a minute, if I'm white, if I'm a white male, what chance do I have? Those kinds of things. So I think there was a term that Nikki used. I'm gonna see if I can find it really quickly, but it was something around risk towards remedy. So there's risk that you're taking towards the remedy that you're doing. But at the same time, you have to also say, if I put my other hat back on, employee experience, we've got to make sure that we're pushing on this term inclusion. And that inclusion actually means it means that we're including everybody, right? It's not meant to be exclusionary. So this is a very interesting dynamic that you're playing all day, every day. So you're that risk towards remedy, but you're holding on to the folks that you have, because we also need them to be champions at the same time.
Yes.
That's what makes, it's not the strategies within DE&I that are hard, it's the operationalizing it. And it varies so dramatically from company to company, culture to culture. So that's how I would answer that question.
Good.
And
Thank
I would just add to your point about operationalizing the sustainability of strategies is looking for those white allies in unsuspecting places at all levels of the organization, because they are there. There are a number of people with whom I've encountered in my new role who just called me directly to say, I'm supportive of the work you are doing. I recognize that I do not represent the population that would call you and say, I'm supportive of the work you're doing, but please let me know if there's any way that I can champion your causes in the circles where I run, where I can make connections with other people who share my points of view, who are also older white men. I'm happy to help you make connections. And that's been important for me to identify who the allies are that are not the biggest names within the company, but who have, they don't necessarily have title influence, but they are influential leaders because of their tenure, because of the institutional history that they have, and knowing how things operate and who the real decision makers are. And sometimes it's not always the folks that have the title. It's the people who influence the folks that have the title and make the decisions. And so there's a whole little a black book, if you will, of employees that I'm keeping who've self-identified as allies and advocates for the work. And so I think it's really important to always remember that those people are out there and will help support the cause of sustainable efforts.
Just, I don't know if we have time, but building on that a little bit, I think that's one of the biggest things that came out of the crisis of the 2020 George Floyd crisis, as I like to call it, is this need, this notion that is not enough to be, I'm not, it's how to become an anti-racist. And to become an ally, and people asking that question. And so interestingly, and again, for all the people in the audience who are practitioners, for us, we spent, 2019 and 2020 training everybody on unconscious bias, but our next big step in our learning journey is allyship. Is giving not everybody the tools to become an ally, period, the end. And so that's coming up in terms of our 2022 next step, because that's what everybody's asking for. Because they want to be allies, but sometimes they don't know how.
How to do it.
They don't know how to do it. And we've got to give them the tools to teach them how to do it.
Exactly.
And our allies are probably the people who are most likely to hear from the people who are also in opposition of what we're trying to do, right? They're not going to share that with you or me, but
Exactly.
they may share with their allies when they think they're in the same company. Good. Earlier, Nikki spoke to the notion that when we're more diverse and more inclusive, that everyone wins. And there's a question in the chat about, well, how about the people who might feel that, okay, we now have these diverse slates. I'm now competing against more qualified people, and maybe they don't think we're qualified, but more qualified people. So perhaps I am a loser in this movement forward because the competition is now stiffer for every job that I aspire towards. And that's not something that you probably won't hear that articulated that way from people who are in opposition. But in terms of building allyship on the fringes, perhaps, or getting more people to buy into the work that you're doing, has any thought been given to that? Or are we starting with processes and procedures that kind of force me into behaving a certain way, and hopefully my thinking will follow at some point?
I'm not sure if I'm 100% understanding the question. So
Sure, I can rephrase that.
Yeah. So
one would be to, are we mindful of people who see DE&I as a win-lose proposition? That I'm now competing against more people. Yeah. And if so, what approaches are you taking to minimize that noise, if you will?
Yeah, I think what we have to be and I almost hate to have to say this, but every time when we talk about, in our case, diverse slate, we always have to follow with the most qualified candidate will get the job. And I hate to have to say that, because why should you have to? Right? Find yourself needing to make sure that this is not about a quota. First of all, it's illegal. Secondly, and more importantly, for the person coming in, let's say we hired Theoria. She wants to be known as the person who was most qualified for that job. Like, nobody wants to feel like I only got hired because I'm a woman or African-American or whatever it is. So we got to make sure we break that narrative. And so at the end of the day, bring your A game, right? If you're if there's 10 people in the panel, 50% of them are going to be, let's just call it the majority relative to the functional area that you're in, and 50% are going to be the non-majority. Then everybody's going to bring their A game, and we're looking for the best person, and the most qualified person should get that job. Now, question might be, how do you make sure that there isn't bias in that selection of that person? A bunch of different ways to do that. So it isn't just an interview slate on its own. It's from the very beginning as the job description written in a way that allows everybody to come in. And there's a tool, by the way, called Textio, Textio, that helps you do that through artificial intelligence. So as you're writing that job description, it's actually correcting it to make sure that it feels gender balanced and there aren't biases, et cetera. So the beginning of the process. In the middle of the process is making sure that we're giving people what we call consensus-based interview questions. Human beings, all of us, when we interview, if we're not careful, we're looking for a twin. The person that is most familiar. You went to high school with me, you remind me of my cousin, and you spend the rest of the time validating the fact that I really like Barry. He seems like the right person. We're not asking all the right questions. So we give you questions just to make sure, right? We also train you a little bit before to watch out for biases. And then more importantly, at the end, who gets to make the decision? Let's not make it sort of the alpha in the room or even the boss. Let's make sure that everybody's giving their input, and that we also have diverse people on that panel that are interviewing folks. So there's a bunch of different strategies or tactics, I should say, that support that strategy to hopefully ensure that we're getting the most qualified candidate and that we minimize some of those responses. Now, we're going to get everybody to believe in that? Perhaps not, but we're taking risk towards remedy.
I'll add two things to what you shared, Brian, because I had this experience since I've been at Gulfstream. There was a company-wide announcement. I'm not sure if it was meant to all employees or just human resources, of this commitment to have diverse slates, right? And the first iteration of that announcement said that it was going to have diverse slates that were defined as women or people of color who were the most qualified. And I was just like, no, we need to reverse the order, right? We're looking for diverse, we're looking for qualified candidates who are also diverse, right? Women and or people of color, so that the standard for consideration was very clear that you get hired because you are qualified, but there may be employees who fit the category of being diverse as well, but the people who are being interviewed for the job have met those qualifications. And I really like the framework that you put about going all the way back to the beginning of the job description, because that's so critical, because the bias begins there. But it's also really important for the decision makers to ask the questions like, who is on my team? What are my saturation points? What are the gaps in skills and perspectives? And how can the next candidate who comes onto the team add value to fill in those gaps, such that when you get to the point where you're asking the people to provide that consensus feedback, it's not how do we feel about these candidates, it's which one of these qualified candidates will add the most value to fill the gaps that we've identified. And so it's also reframing the way we have those conversations when we're engaging in consensus, to keep it focused on the needs that need to be addressed when we're filling a requisition, as opposed to finding someone who will fit into the pre-existing.
Good, thank you. And I would think as the hiring manager, I also have to be brave enough to say, if there are 6 of me on the team, I don't need a 7th me on the team, right?
Yeah.
And so, I have these other very qualified candidates. Let me take someone who's going to give me the complete different perspective from the one I'm showing. The other 7 of us are showing up with every day.
I call those saturation points. They get what I mean when I say it.
Okay. Too many of somebody, huh? Okay. Good. Thank you. We only have a few minutes left. Would either of you be able to speak to the entrepreneurs in the audience around your supplier diversity programs, initiatives? Are there ways in which, if I wanted to do business with your organization, I should approach it, or maybe not even that specific, but things that you would encourage entrepreneurs to think about when they're thinking about doing business with major organizations?
Supplier diversity is something that we're just starting to take on. And what I know so far in my very, very preliminary work on it is, I'm sure your certification is key, right? It isn't saying I'm a diverse supplier, is having that certification. And I think there are companies that can do that for you. And there are perhaps places where those, particularly at the state level, there's some sort of central database where you can get your name and your company out there as a certified diverse supplier. I think a lot of companies are now looking at this as the next way or next level in. So yes, we can get it at the employee base, but then what happens for all the folks that are contributing into the company and the products that we make? Instinctively for me, if I had to start somewhere in the spirit of not trying to boil the ocean, my idea right now is to start with suppliers that most affect the outcome of our consumer products. So who are our freelancers that are designing our toys and games? Who are the people that are taking pictures and shooting videos and making commercials for our products? Folks like that come closest to the consumer. So, I am concerned about everybody, but in terms of if we have to pick a lane, that's the one that I'm probably going to run down first. Because if I go all the way back to this notion of really at the end of the day, it's through that capitalist construct that we're looking for. And our consumer for us is the one that we're focused on. So we want to make sure that we are representative and that we're delivering sort of the right thing to this very diverse consumer base that we know. But that's as much as my expertise stops right there.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for that. As a baby boomer, I was defaulting to brick and mortar, but you're so right on there, right? It could even be social influencers who we could bring into the fold as well. Yeah.
I have a limited understanding. I've only worked at Gulfstream for about 9 months. I started in February. I do know that with all of our suppliers, we do take bids because a critical mass of our contracts are government contracts. So there is some consideration of equity. I've also heard the narrative that there are not a lot of diverse suppliers in this field specifically of like aerospace engineering and product. One of the things that I can offer, because I know who has the certification to be a diverse supplier, is his way in the door to providing services for this company in particular was to subcontract with a person that already had a relationship with the corporation. And it was it was like a foot in the door opportunity for him to demonstrate in the long term that he has the capacity to provide services for folks in this industry. So he I believe, signed like a 5-year contract with a person that already has a contract with Gulfstream, which added value to that person's like package, because now they're partnering with a diverse supplier. But like after that contract, then he has the experience to go out to any one of the competitors in the industry and as well to demonstrate I've provided these services in this way. And so perhaps partnering with the currently existing the supplier, and if that is even like a tactic, but that could be like a strategic way to get a foot in the door in certain industries.
Good, thank you. All righty, we are at time. I'd like to thank you both for your insight and perspective today. You were clearly spot on, so much so that we did not have a lot of questions for you. And so my apologies for any curveballs that I might have thrown you towards the end there. And I trust that the audience really recognized and appreciated the diversity of your organizations and thus your perspective in terms of what's best and how we can take advantage of the index, if you will, on making sure that Blacks are taken into account in all aspects of organizations. So with that, again, thank you both. And I'll turn it back over to Hutch.
Thank you, Barry, for having us.
My pleasure.
All right, so hello. Yes, oh my goodness, that was fantastic. So wrapping up the 2 sessions we've had so far, Nikki, you were fantastic. Felicia, thank you so much. I do want to, there are a couple of things. So for Nikki's presentation, I wrote down a bunch, but DEI is a paced, sequenced, and what was that word? Disciplined practice. Oh, so true. And so many more nuggets, Nikki, that you dropped. So thank you so much. Thank you to the panel we just concluded with Brianni and Theoria, moderated beautifully and wonderfully by Barry. Everyone was wonderful. And thank you all for being here and asking and posing so many thoughtful questions, so many comments in the chat. We are very appreciative. So up next, we do have a keynote from Rob West representing our sponsor, TD Bank. So again, we're going to ask you to make sure that you are muting yourselves, turning off your video when you're not here. Before we get to the keynote, we are going to take a quick 5-minute break, a 5-minute break. So don't go anywhere. Stay tuned in, and we will see you back here in 5 minutes.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to get ready to hear from our presenting sponsor, TD Bank, in the personage of Rob West. So Rob West Jr. is the Community Development Manager of Central and North Florida for TD Bank. He's also a Vice President for the company. And he's been in banking for 20 years. And before banking, he was in retail management for 5 years with big box stores and athletic retailers. Mr. West has served as an adjunct business professor and has interest in organizational learning, personal development, diversity, equity, and inclusion. He specializes in consulting diverse communities on the lending opportunities for home ownership and small business and commercial banking solutions. He also seeks nonprofit partnerships with a strategic focus on creating a more inclusive future in the areas of financial security, vibrant planet, connected communities, and better health in underserved communities. Mr. West also holds a BS in education from Liberty University and an MED in instruction from the University of Virginia. His studies include organizational leadership, human resources, project management, cultural intelligence, and sales performance. He also is a master's athlete and competes in track and field. His hobbies include reading, working out, and visiting amusement parks and visiting beaches. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure to hear from Rob West, Vice President, Community Development from TD Bank, our presenting sponsor. Rob, it's all yours.
Hi. Okay, am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
All right. Always have to ask, it's been almost 2 years, but we still have to make sure that we're on. So good afternoon. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Hutch. Thank you for organizing this conference. When I first got the invitation to speak about diversity, equity, inclusion, I was pretty excited. So thank you for having me in with this session. So in my current role as a community development manager, I cover Central North Florida. I'm checking into you from Lakeland, but I'll probably be down your way next month because it's kind of mild and it's really nice in December. But in short, what I do for the bank, my partners and I, we work to understand and improve the ways the bank needs to meet the needs of underserved communities, especially Black and Brown communities. So our work is centered around supporting small businesses, as well as investing in and helping to revitalize and stabilize communities in need. As a bank, community development is very important as we seek to help individuals and families and provide them with access to capital and to banking. As we all know, home ownership is key, entrepreneurship is key to building and growing generational wealth. So let me tell you a little bit about diversity and inclusion at TD Bank. You know, one of our mottos is to be a better bank. So in order to be a better bank, we have to have the best people. So we have found we need to find people who have different ways of thinking. We foster culture inclusion. We want to include everybody. Doesn't matter what your ability is, or disability, your experience, and your background. All that helps us become a better bank. And I really love the last panel, you know, striking while the iron's hot. Well, we need to keep striking, and TD Bank is striking. So we want to foster a place of inclusion. We call it bring yourself to work. Doesn't matter what your background, religion, race, gender, physical ability, and sexual orientation. We want your thought. We need you. Because
I'm not doing the keynote.
Our workforce looks just like our communities that we serve. I know the last panel talked about BRGs. TD Bank, we have 6 BRGs, business resource groups. So it's women, minorities, LGBTQ2+, individuals with disabilities, veterans, and we just formed this year a Black Employee Network. So I'll tell you a little bit about these individually. I also want to share, you know, as I am a community development manager, on the side of my desk, I am also a co-lead for veterans, minorities, and Black employees. And I happen to be a member of individuals with disabilities. So I'm 4 out of 6. I don't know if I get anything for it, but I represent 4 out of 6 BRGs for the bank. So when it comes to women, we have seen how COVID has really impacted women. So we have made our workforce more accommodating. So we have more people working at home. We have a lot more women who have left the workplace and come back. We're making it very easy, and we have a transition process to help them move along through every stage of their life and their career. And also the BRGs offer support and sponsorship and retainment, because we know we really need women as they balance home, work, and the community. When we look at our minorities business resource group, we have to foster and look at different talent. So not only, you know, we recruit from major schools, we're now looking at how do we recruit from HBCUs, how do we recruit from tech schools. So we need everyone who's involved. So we have internships, externships, and mentoring programs to help develop that diverse talent. LGBTQ2+, we want to make this a place you can come out to, also a place where you can bring your whole self to work. And if you look at some of the publications such as Diversity Inc. and also Forbes, TD Bank is one of the best banks when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Individuals with diverse abilities, we have a tech department, and that's all they do is create accommodations for those in need, whether it's seeing impaired, need a comfy chair, or different things that are ergonomic. We have a department that just works with that. Veterans, this is dear to my heart. You know, part of George Floyd and the situation that we've seen, I've done a whole lot of looking into my family's background. Found out we have had people who have served since the Civil War, since 1863. So we have served from every war till now. So it's very important to me. So we find that veterans are dedicated, they're adaptable, they're determined. I tell my leaders, if you want something done, ask a vet. Also something we do in the community, every year we have employees that go to Arlington National Cemetery and they hand out flowers to those who are visiting their loved ones. As I stated before, we have a new Black Employee Network, and it is awesome. I'll tell you, during Black History Month, TD Bank had 4 webinars. They focused on Black thought, Black wealth, Black health, and Black joy. And I'm happy to tell everyone next year, Juneteenth is a paid holiday. So as you see, diversity, equity, inclusion is very important to TD Bank as one of our core principles. So it's important for us to attract, develop, and retain a diverse workforce. So thank you again for listening in. Thank you for joining the conference. And back to you, Hutch. Have a great day.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate the support that we've received and continue to receive in our partnership with TD Bank. I can say from an intimate perspective, having been partnered with TD Bank for about the past 6-7 years, TD Bank has stepped up in many different ways, and they're strong supporters of the Urban League here. They have a number of different funds they have created to support initiatives in the Black community. And so one of the things that we really believe in is that we want to support those people who are supporting us. And so we want to just say thank you again, Rob. We appreciate you being here. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Felicia Henderson.
Yes, my pleasure.
And Felicia, it's all yours.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker for this afternoon. James Fripp is the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer of Yum Brands, the company behind Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, KFC, and the Habit Burger Grill. With more than 50,000 restaurants in 150 countries. We have global responsibilities for advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies and practices across the company's brands, workplaces, and franchise system. His focus is increasing diverse representation among company leadership, franchisees, and suppliers, and continuing the rollout of inclusive leadership and anti-racist training across the country and franchise system. Since 2011, James has led diversity and inclusion efforts, elevating Yum Brands' public commitments and partnerships. He has trained thousands of brand and franchise leaders around the world on the topics of inclusive leadership and unconscious bias. Previously, James held various leadership positions at Taco Bell, from operations, restaurant excellence, ending his career with the brand as head of field human resources. He is a member of the Clemson University Corporate CDO Advisory Board and chair of the Corporate Advisory Board for the Multicultural Food Service and Hospitality Alliance. James is also a member of the University of North Carolina Corporate Advisory Board on Diversity and Inclusion, and is a member of the National Restaurant Association Education Foundation Board. He holds a bachelor's degree in business management from the University of Phoenix and is a certified unconscious bias facilitator. Let me welcome James Fripp.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me see if I can't pull up my slides here for us and get us going. Man, oh man, I am, I don't know about you all, but I am on fire from the past panels and the sessions. My little note paper is all tore up. I mean, it's so I didn't forgot most of my talk. Let me just say that because of listening to what everybody else has done. But it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you to you, Hutch and team, for allowing me to spend some time with the group today, and for all of you who are taking time out of your Saturday to be here with us. So I'm going to take a few minutes and just talk about this notion of so what's changed, and talk a little bit about what I'm seeing. A lot of what we've just heard, as I look at just all the notes that I've taken from this morning, and just try to tie things together if we can, and end on this notion that at the end of the day, however difficult it is for us today, there were folks who came before us. And so I think about my journey as one that's been made significantly easier based upon all of those and the trials and tribulations that they went through to get where they're at. So I try to keep that in context, and we'll ask you to do the same as we talk through this few minutes. So what has changed? Well, as we know it, in 2020, all hell broke loose. And during that time, there was a significant impact on all of us as people of color, all of us as a country, all of us as a globe. So many things happening that really, really got us so off kilter that the world basically stopped. What was interesting during that time is the impact on some versus others. Now, clearly, all of us were impacted during that time. But for us as people of color, we experienced things in ways that not only we couldn't believe, but others couldn't believe either. In fact, if we go back to the last discussion, as we neared the end of that discussion, talked about this notion of allies and allyship. What changed for me in 2020 was, yes, we saw the hate, we saw the ugliness, but what we also saw was these allies who came out, were out in the streets with us, in some cases for us, and were there to support us. And so there was a lot that happened. All the ugliness is what it is, but there are folks out there that are looking to support us in this community. And so I try to keep that in context because there's enough ugliness to go around. In fact, many times I stop watching the news because there's just nothing good on there, nothing that inspires me. And being a person of color and doing the work that I do, if I come in with the wrong mindset, not some days, any day, I come in with the wrong mindset, I can set not just the work that I do, but I can set our people back. I can set our people back months, if not years, based upon how I show up and how I show out in the workplace. So just a little bit about how I think about what's gone on so far. So now, other things have changed as well. This whole notion of working from home, what is that about? I mean, we're almost into 2 years of working at home, and there's a lot of learnings that have come out of that. A lot has changed in that, and we'll talk a little about that. Companies are making bold promises about getting greater diversity. Now, not unlike any other company, we still have a long way to go here at Young Brands, and we're working on that. But what has happened in that time is, and it was mentioned earlier, we as people of color who are qualified are sought after. We've got opportunities today that we have never had. We have never had. We've got folks chasing us and throwing more money at us than we can shake a stick at. And some of us are going for it. Others are like, wait a minute, do we trust it? And it was said in the earlier panels, our folks, and Bryony said it, are folks in it for the long term, or is this just a trend? And why that matters in this moment for us is because everybody's not our friend. Now, there's well-meaning people out there. My company, as well as many other companies, want to do the right thing. We want to do the right thing. But what has changed is this whole notion of allyship and well-meaning people and the focus on achieving the goal of getting more representation in our organizations. In some cases, so much so that even the well-meaning folks could actually set us up for failure. I've seen people get jobs offered to them that, to be brutally honest with you, have had no reason, no skill set, there's no way in hell they should have taken these jobs. Why? Because give it 12 to 18 months, and I think things will change. These big jobs and big titles that some of us are getting and chasing after the money, when folks realize that maybe we weren't prepared to do those jobs, we're going to lose those jobs. And what it's going to do is validate stereotypes. Now, the flip side of that is I've seen some of us get some phenomenal jobs. And you know what? And we're going to knock the ball out of the park. And I could not be more proud and more excited for those individuals. My point being, this notion of what has changed is while we are being sought after and people really want to add diversity to their teams, make sure that it's real. Check yourself. Check yourself. already. I'm not saying don't take chances, but what I am saying is be thoughtful, be reflective, get close to people who know you and engage with those people and use them and stay close to those mentors, stay close to those sponsors, and make sure you're getting the guidance that you need. Because in this moment, it's a time that we can show up and show out in a way that we've never had the opportunity to and blow the doors off this thing and create spaces and places for those who will come behind us. So we have to be thoughtful about it. We have to be real thoughtful about that. I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying don't go look at a new opportunity. I'm saying look at the opportunity, but make sure it's the right one for you. And of top companies and hiring 1 million Black people over the next 10 years. It's a great organization. It's called 110. If you haven't heard about it, get to know about it. Led by two of the most prolific and the most effective Black leaders in business, Ken Frazier and Ken Chenault. 110. Again, the goal is to hire 1 million Black folks in family-sustaining wage jobs over the next 10 years. Google that, be a part of it, support it wherever you can, because our organization, Young Brands, has signed on for this. And what it's saying is, we're going to make sure that we bring on as many folks as we can. And especially in this time, in this particular organization, 1 million, we're going to give our best to help with that 1 million Black folks into family sustaining wage jobs and help do that as quickly as we can. There is talking about it, and then there's being about it. The question you need to ask as you look at any organization that you're going to is, are they really being about it? And there's a lot of organizations out there since last year with all the companies saying what they're going to do and how we're going to go about things. People are watching, people are checking and holding us accountable for, are you going to do what you said you were going to do? And our goal is to make sure that we are being about it, not just talking about it at Young. Now, then there's this, being on these calls. What does this mean to people of color in the workplace? Now, there's a couple of different paths here. Now, for some, many Black employees working from home is a refuge from racism. So some of us are like, whoo, now I don't have to code switch. I don't have to, show up and have people say things or act certain ways, or I get left out of this circle or not included in that circle and things like that. That works for some of us. And it's a relief so we can focus on the business. For others, it's okay, great. So how do I be seen now? I mean, because now I'm just one of a bunch of tiles on a screen. How do I get my time with leadership? How do I get my exposure? Much of our organizations, you're limited to, unless you're very intentional about it, you're limited to just who's on your screen and on your teams. Because I haven't seen many people that are like, okay, great. So, all right, we've been on 17 calls today, and I want to get on one more just to get on the line with some folks who aren't in my function. But what happens is we can get off the radar. We can fall off the radar if we're not still staying connected. And so while we may feel better and it may feel safer and it may be more relaxing and easier to engage on our work and focus on our work to be successful, it can actually move us off the radar and not have us not be as visible as we need to be or should be or could be as we want to grow our careers. So that's a change. And we really have to think about and be intentional about what we do to get out there, what we do to make sure that we stay relevant, what we do to make sure that not just our coach, we call them coaches, our bosses, not just only those folks know us, but how do we connect and engage with other, not only leaders, but other peers across the organization. So when someone says your name, folks are like, yes, I want to engage with that individual. So just some things to think about. This whole notion of working from home while being Black. What does that look like? How do I feel about it? And some of the things that I've already mentioned in terms of how do we show up in that time. Now, the reality of it is all of this in the workplace today, it is chess, it's not checkers. How do you go about juggling all of those things? How do you make sure you show up the way you need to in the context of Zoom and Teams? But how do you make sure you also show up in a way that folks are not only going to remember you, but folks are going to seek you. Folks are going to ask for your help. It came up around this whole notion of leveraging employee resource groups as your focus groups. You know, it's about how do we make sure that when those projects that come up that we used to hear about when we were in the offices, how do we make sure we get in a circle by which we hear those things via Zoom now or via Teams, so we can still raise our hand to do that short-term assignment or to get a little bit of that exposure in those different venues. And we'll talk a little bit about some ways to do that here in just a second. But indeed, it is chess, it's not checkers in today's world. Remember, we're being sought after by a bunch of different companies, right? How we show up and how we show out and how we make sure that we are representative of not only who we want to be for us, but who we want to be for ours. So this came up in the conversations earlier around, well, wait a minute, because if everybody's focused on people of color, then how might that impact those in our majority ranks? Because everybody's not a fan, especially if you think it might be a zero-sum game. And you know what? If it's you or me, I'm sorry, it's got to be me. So it's this notion of it's not the right thing to do, this whole notion of equity, inclusion, and belonging. This is about business. And it was mentioned earlier, this notion of, hey, look, given where demographics are going, Nikki said and laid out very clearly, here's what it's going to look like, right? Dr. Kaysen and Bryony said, hey, look, if you do this, if you don't have these folks represented, you're probably not going to be successful. At Young Brands, what we talk about is we're going to have to be red. We got to be relevant, we got to be easy, and we got to be distinctive. Well, you cannot do that if you are not diverse. And not just diverse in the lowest levels, but diverse throughout your enterprise, especially in decision-making roles that have impact. To Bryony's point around this notion of who's your customers, if you don't have leadership in places and spaces that have direct impact on your customers, you will not be relevant, easy, and distinctive. What you will be is canceled. That's not an option for us. But how do you get there? How do you get people to understand the importance and the significance of equity, inclusion, and belonging? This slide here comes from a friend of mine, Mike McCusta. He runs an organization called ETHNIFACTS, ETHNIFACTS. And when you're talking about equity, inclusion, and belonging and why it matters, when you start talking about it in the context of business, and if you look at the bottom row, years of effective buying power, non-Hispanic white, 36 years, African Americans, 42 years, Asians, 52, all the way over to Hispanics at almost 57 years or almost 20 years more than our non-Hispanic whites. What it looks like to me is those three demographics to the right are going to offer companies the longest opportunity to be relevant, easy, and distinctive, and ultimately successful. Okay? Now, what I didn't say is our non-Hispanic white folks lose in this deal, because what happens is we get more business by being more relevant, more easy, and more distinctive, which means we need more of everybody, not just some, but more of everybody. And I don't know if you checked out there today in your own companies, I know it isn't true in ours. We need everybody. We need folks left and right, here and there. We know we need all people. And especially in these times when labor is short, people are going to have more, employees are going to have more choices, and they're going to choose organizations who best resemble and or share purpose with them. Our goal is to not get left out of that. You all know our brands, Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut, Happy Burger Grill. We don't serve some people, we serve all people. And we need to have all people in our organization. Now, during this moment of change, it's critical. And Hutch said this. Hutch, I'm stealing your words. I'm sorry, but you said them. I got to take them. It's critical to connect, critical to collaborate, and definitely critical when it comes to building relationships, building partnerships, building sponsorships. Now, Tamara, you said, how do you navigate through being told it is more about relationships, not skills when seeking career progression? I don't know who's telling you that, but they're right. They're right. How many times have you seen somebody who doesn't have expertise in a role, who doesn't seem to have ever had any education in that space, but they get the position? Well, they get the position because they have a relationship. And in fact, for me, equity, inclusion, and belonging, or diversity, inclusion, however you want to call it, a lot of times we're focused on the science. And the science is, do we have enough Blacks? Do we have enough Latinx folks, right? Do we have enough Asians? I mean, do we have enough? That's the science. That's the numbers. That's the math. What I focus on is something called the art. I focus on authenticity that leads to relationships, that leads to trust. Why? Because Tamara, last I checked, nobody puts their name on anybody that they don't know. Nobody. You can have all the skills in the world. You can be the best at what you do. But if somebody doesn't trust you, they won't sponsor you. So how do you, great, James, I hear that. So what do I do now? What do I do about that? Well, one of the ways you can build the art, and we're doing this here at Yum, is you do things like reverse mentorships. People do mentorships all the time. In fact, what we talk about as far as people of color is we get mentored so much, that's great. But what we don't get is sponsored. Well, mentorship is just kind of coaching you and giving some nuggets of wisdom and wishing you the best. Sponsorship is when you're not in that room saying, hey, have we thought about Tamara? Because her and I have been connected, and not only is she doing great in her day job, but Tamara is blowing the doors off her work that she's doing in the employee resource group. I mean, while she may not be a leader of officially of teams, she's leading and influencing what's going on in our ERG. We ought to think about putting her in a different role or giving her a chance at this role, right? You get that sponsorship in one way by doing reverse mentorships. And I'll give you an example of what that looks like. So today, our chief legal officer and franchise officer, white male, upper 40s, lower 50s, he is being mentored by an African-American male who was doing IT work in one of our brands, and got those two together, said, hey, Scott, the chief legal officer, I said, here's your mentor. Joe, here's your mentee. Now, Joe's eyes got big, and he was trying to wonder, he's like, okay, what am I supposed to do with that? But the reality of it is, what took place was these two just got a chance to know each other. Joe's job was just to make sure that our chief legal officer understood what it was like to be a person of color here in our organization. They talked about cats, dogs, birds, kids. They talked about all that. But what they connected on is Joe, in his side hustle, he's a DJ. What he didn't know was the chief legal officer is heavily into music, deep into music. These guys connected on music, and we're talking about R&B, we're talking about rap, we're talking about best music genres. After about 10 minutes, I had to drop off the call because I was no longer needed. I set that up for 6 months. Now, I can't get them apart. Couple of things I didn't say. I didn't say they talked about work. I said they talked about getting to know each other. What happened naturally in that environment is Joe was telling Scott and helping him understand. So Scott comes away with a couple of things. Scott is an ally. Scott wants to be an ally. He's always looking to see how he can help. And what he learned is more effectively how he can help support these different communities of color. And he got comfortable asking questions that he may not have been comfortable asking when talking with other folks. What Joe got a sponsor. Joe got a sponsor bigger than Dallas. On a global call with 2,000 people, Scott gets on the call and he's doing the intro. And he said, oh, by the way, did you hear who did the intro today? And if you didn't, understand that that's Joe Monroe. Joe Monroe, if you don't know him, you need to get to know Joe. Here's what Joe has been doing in this organization. He's an outstanding young man, and we love having him on our team. We love having him being a part of Yum. Get to know Joe. His email blew up and all those kinds of things. Fast forward, we're 6 months out now, 7 months out, and Joe just got promoted. Why? Not because Joe just had the chief legal officer as his reverse mentor, but because Joe was doing his day job well. He had a voice in the room. When he wasn't there, he had support behind the scenes. And as a result of that, he's been promoted. He's a great guy. He's going to be awesome at what he does. But this is just one example of how you build the art. The other thing that I didn't say is I didn't tell Scott he needed to mentor Joe. I told Scott that his job was to make sure he learned everything that he could from Joe. And as a result of that, be able to be a better ally to communities of color. And that's what he did. Did they talk about work at some point? I'm sure they did. But that wasn't the key. Why? Because going back to this whole notion of science versus the art, why folks get those jobs that you're like, well, how did they get that? It was because of the authentic relationships that have led to trust. And if you're really good, it does what it did for Joe. Authentic relationships that lead to trust, that lead to sponsorship. So we go from the art to the arts. So that's just one example. So Nikki said this: racial equity is de facto disruptive. And that stuck with me because I feel it, I live it every day in the work that we do. But what I would ask us to consider is this news flash. You or we resemble that remark. What do I mean by that? In the workplace, when we show up, we are an example, we're a sample, we are the visual piece of racial equity is de facto disruptive. Said differently, when we show up and we do great, it's going to rub some people wrong. People are going to be wondering, oh, are they going to choose him now over me? Well, if we know and understand that, it can inform a lot of what we do. I'm not saying don't be yourself. As Dr. Casey said, I'm unapologetically Black, right? But I can do that in a way that once I know, in Dr. Casey, because she knows who she is, she knows what she's about, she knows what she's there to do. Because she has all of that already put away, she can show up and show out without worrying about those things. She doesn't have anything to prove to anybody. Her work stands for itself. Oh. Okay, for the record, that's not me. So, but she shows up and shows out the way that she does because she doesn't have to argue or fight within herself about what she's doing. She knows who she is. She goes in and she does what she does. Right? But just understand, if we understand that racial equity is de facto disruptive and we resemble that remark when we're in the workplace, then we can think about how do we then outwit, outsmart, outplay, or how do we play chess versus checkers with that in mind? Because when we do, and when we better understand how to show up, it helps us with things. First and foremost is the notion of we as people of color, well, let me just speak for me. As I came up, I was busy trying to prove every day. I want to make sure they know. I want to make sure they know I know. I want to make sure that I show up in a way that they're like, you know, this guy is something, he's got his stuff together. You know, I was always trying to prove, but in some cases, I was so busy trying to be right that it stopped me from being effective or successful. I was trying to prove I knew. I know what you're talking about. Yep, I've done my research on it. I can argue every way to Sunday to make sure that you understand that I'm right on this point. Well, in working so hard to be right, what I missed was it wasn't about being right. What it was about is building authentic relationships that lead to trust. I was so busy trying to be right on the topic. So we have to ask our question. I ask myself every single day, do I want to be right? Or do I want to be right and effective and successful? Just something that in this work, it's hard work. Some days people say things to you, and you're like, you know, okay, no, not one more again, okay? Right, but if I go the wrong direction, or if I show up and show out in a way that's not helpful, I impact all of those behind me. And that I cannot do. That I cannot do. The other thing we have to think about is, as it pertains to this whole notion of do we want to be right, or do we want to be right and effective and successful? Sometimes we show up and we want to be the leader. We want to show up as a leader. The challenge is you're not the leader if nobody's following you. You're not the leader if nobody's following you. Just some things that came up for me. Okay, full transparency, I'm telling on myself. But what they say, learn lessons from those who've already done it so you don't have to do that. Now, this is important. The business for us is looking for something unique and great. Wherever we work, whenever we get hired to do a job, whenever we're in these companies, the company is looking for something great from us. Why? Because we say we're different. You know, that we look different, we show up different. They're looking for something different, even if they can't express what it is. And Tamara, you're on my mind, you're on my heart, because you're like, yeah, how do you navigate through this? What I hear them telling you, Tamara, is number one, yes, relationships matter, but they're also looking for something unique and great from you. And I'm apologize. Maybe Dr. Kaysen, maybe you said you told people what you could bring to the table. You told people what your value was. You told you what you were going to bring that maybe they didn't have but needed, and they didn't know it. People are looking for something unique from us. We just need to tell them what it is and tell them in a way that they can receive it. When we go back to that slide where we talked about this whole notion of effective buying power, if we talk to folks about effective buying power and the years of effective buying power by the different demographics, and the fact that if we don't have these demographics in our organization and informing what we do, we'll make missteps. And you can go out on the internet and you can pull up companies that have made missteps because they didn't have representation. And you share those things with folks, right? Bring forward with your unique demographic, and we talk a little bit about generations. What can you bring to the table that a generation may not know about, that needs to know about those things? I mean, this whole notion, speaking of today, Clubhouse, right? Most folks, a lot of folks don't know what Clubhouse is, don't know what it's about, and don't know what to do with it, right? That's something unique that you can bring to the table that can make sure that you stand out and look differently than somebody else. So as we close, in this moment of change, what I would say is, as I started my comments, I talked about there were those that came before us that had it so much more difficult than I have it. I sit in the corner office. My little 3 windows look over the pond, right? I get my little car and come to work and show up And yes, somebody may say something cockeyed and cross-eyed to me. Okay. But those who came before me had to go through much, much more difficult challenges than I've ever had to go through. And so in this moment of change, how do we show up at work on teams? When there's this quest for Black folks everywhere, when you may get opportunities that you may not have gotten before, when you have people who want to help you, allies that are like, hey, look, I don't know what to do, but can you please just give me something so I know how to help you? It may be exhausting. I heard that word all last year, James. I'm exhausted as a person of color, trying to show up and try to educate people all the time. I'm not saying that's our job every day to educate people in terms of who we are. People know how to go look for things. But I tell you what, when you want to build the authentic relationship that leads to trust and you engage, that may be the very thing that takes it from the art to the arts, right? But also, I do respect the fact that if you don't want to do that and feel that's someone else's burden, when someone comes to you and says, hey, look, can you help me with this? Kindly guide them to some place that can help them. Whether it's a book, whether it's another person, whether it's online, whatever it is, so you don't have to be that person. I totally and absolutely respect that. But just think about in this moment of change, we have an opportunity that we may not get for a long, long time. We don't know when the window is going to shut. Things are just continue to go on. And I believe, like Bryony, that equity, inclusion, belonging is going to be here for the long term. However, it can be tiring. It can be difficult. All of us on this call are going to run into things that we're going to be like, are we still dealing with this? And the answer is yes. But again, remember those who came before us. I can't think of a day in my life that has been as hard as it was for my father and my mother and those who came before us there. So what I'd ask that you do, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Thank you all for your time today. Appreciate you. Thank you for spending a Saturday, very precious time, days off and things like that. But what you were doing is showing up and showing out and hopefully showing others how we as people of color move ahead. Thank you all for your time.
Wow, that's all I can say is just wow. Such a powerful thoughts and insights, and a great way to end today's session. I think if you look in the chat, James, you will see all the love and the response to all the points you made. Just phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Appreciate you so much.
Well, okay, ladies and gentlemen, I do have to correct Felicia just a little bit. We're not finished, so don't log off yet. We've got just a couple more things to do. We're almost finished though. And we know that Zoom fatigue is a real deal. So we want to make sure that we go ahead and wrap this up. And someone said to me that we can endure as much as our butts can. So I know we've been sitting and watching this, so give us about another 10 minutes and we're going to be about done here. But, you know, James, just want to thank Young for being a host sponsor and for the awards that are coming up and for being a part of making this possible. And as I looked in the chat, as Felicia said, you know, I think the thing that really grabbed my attention was I saw a chat message that says, he is amazing and he keeps it real. So I don't think you can get a much higher compliment than that from our people when you see something like that. So, but everybody has been amazing. And so we're going to close out. So I'm not going to get into my closing right now. So we're going to get ready for the awards. And so we have two awards today. One's an Emerging Leader Award and the other one is the Legacy Leader Award. And so we have selected two individuals who represent, you know, opposite ends of the spectrum or two different ends of the spectrum. Someone who has already had a lifetime of achievement in diversity, equity, and inclusion with their efforts, and you'll be hearing about her. And then also someone who has really gotten started in her career and has great potential for growth. And so our first award is going to be the Emerging Leader Award. Denise Kegler, my co-founder, is going to introduce and award the Emerging Leader.
I am so thrilled to do that, Hutch. Thank you very much. So let's get right to it. Busisiwe Shadreo is the executive coach and founder of Black Women in the Workplace, a company whose goal is to increase the representation of Black women leaders in the workplace. Her expertise is in diversity and inclusion strategy and implementation, and career coaching for Black women in the workplace. She is an advisory board member, of Black Professionals Month. We are so thrilled to have her help bring this to you. Busi, who she's affectionately known as, provides career coaching and resources to support Black women to position themselves for the next stage of their careers, navigate workplace bias, and be effective in their leadership. She consults with corporations to create a pipeline of Black women to fill leadership positions and facilitates the creation of corporate cultures that allow diversity to thrive. Busi has an MBA from Hindley Business School, South Africa, and the University of Reading in the UK, an advanced diploma in risk management from the University of South Africa, a BCom accounting science degree from the University of Pretoria, and is a certified life coach. She also works in higher education management and is an established governance, risk, and compliance specialist. Busisiwe Shadreo, coming to us from South Africa, in recognition of your current and increasing impact on the growth, development, and advancement of Black professional women in the workplace, BPM is proud to present you with the BPM Emerging Leader Award. Busi.
Unmute.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you very much, Denise and Haj, and everyone who was involved in creating this. I really felt the love and the generosity since we started Black Professionals Month. I'm in South Africa and I've learned so much today, and I feel so encouraged and motivated to take this work forward. I really believe that every generation has a generational challenge, although our challenge is not the same as the generations that came before us, but ours is also more difficult because it's not so visible. And sometimes when we make it to the middle class, it looks like we have made it and the problem is not so big, but actually it is. And we have a job to do to make sure that something happens. And I'm doing that with Black women in the workplace. And I'm so glad that I'm in the company of people who are doing that as well. So I feel so at home today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Busi, as well. And we are just humbled and pleased and honored to be able to work. And but more importantly, to be able to connect with you, because we know that as the African diaspora is something that we're all connected through. That as this Black Professionals Month is about not just Black professionals in one country, but really Black professionals globally and worldwide. That having you a part of this process is definitely a strong, if you will, indication. And we're going to grow this. We're going to have other countries in Africa as well as throughout the rest of the world. So thank you again so much, and congratulations on the great work that you're doing, and we're here to support you. So now is my pleasure to introduce our Legacy Award winner, and she is Antoinette, and she's referred to by most as Tony Hardy Waller. She is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of the Leverage Network, which is a nonprofit organization committed to the promotion of board diversity by increasing the numbers of seats held by Blacks on boards in healthcare, as well as also Blacks in senior level positions. She is an accomplished senior executive, entrepreneur, and clinician with extensive leadership and management experience. She has more than 30 years of experience building, owning, and managing healthcare businesses in the post-acute space. And prior to co-founding TLN, Tony founded Strategic Healthcare Transformations, a national consulting firm assisting health systems nationally in the development of post-acute continuums of care. She has been involved with the Leverage Network on a number of different levels, and they have a number of different programs. They have the Executive Women of Color conference that they do every year, where they are connecting, excuse me, and helping executive women connect and collaborate to build greater opportunities in terms of leadership. She's also has an emerging leaders program through the Leverage Network for Black professionals in the healthcare space. And that program has been extremely well received. And Antoinette Hardy Waller is truly a legacy leader in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion, and helping Blacks to achieve the levels of responsibilities in executive leadership and on boards. And so it is my pleasure to recognize her commitment to supporting and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion for Black professionals in the global workforce, and to present her with this BPM Legacy Award. Unfortunately, Tony couldn't be with us today due to a prior commitment, but she has taped the message that she wants you to hear, and I'm going to share my screen and play that. Give me just a second here.
First, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Jerome, and Black Professionals Month for considering me for this prestigious Diversity Legacy Award. I am both honored and humbled by it. But I also want to take this opportunity to commend you, Jerome, on your amazing work that you're doing with ICABA in building wealth and leadership capacity among Black professionals. Kudos to you on that. I've been in the healthcare industry for over 30 years, and for the majority of my career, we have had consistent conversations about diversity and the impact that it can have on an organization. First, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you over 30 years, and for the majority of my career, we have had consistent conversations about diversity and the impact that it can have on an organization. In fact, there are studies and reports that demonstrate that more diverse organizations have higher organizational performance and a better bottom line than non-diverse organizations. But still, as Black professionals, we are so severely underrepresented in the highest decision-making roles in those same organizations. I founded the Leverage Network in 2014 to change that dynamic and to ensure that more Black professionals and executives are represented in boardrooms and C-suites in healthcare organizations across the country. Since that time, we have had hundreds of Black executives come through our programs which include our Executive Women of Color Summit, our Healthcare Board Initiative, as well as our newly launched Emerging Leaders Program. And through those programs, we help position them to promote themselves for promotion in the boardroom and in the C-suite. So I, like you, Jerome, and the Black Professionals Month, am ignited, and I am on fire to change how healthcare is governed and led. So again, I thank you for this amazing award and for the recognition, especially for the work that we do at the Leverage Network every day to change the dynamic. Thank you.
All right, so now we will hear back again from our co-founder, Denise Kegler, for closing comments.
Yes, absolutely. Closing comments. Wow, it has been an amazing day, morning, afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much, all of you, for, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, for spending part of your Saturday with BPM. We could not be more appreciative. Thank you to the honorees, to Busi and Antoinette, congratulations. Thank you to the production team for this event led by Gina and Charles, and so many people behind the scenes to bring you this event. So we thank you for being here and to helping us continue to celebrate Black Professionals Month. So I'm going to close out with just a couple of things. As I mentioned in a note that I sent out to the attendees yesterday, sad but true, Black Professionals Month is coming to an end, at least 2021. So again, thank you for being part of this unprecedented initiative that was created to help increase the presence of Black professionals in leadership roles around the world. The various speakers in the sessions talked about what we can do both individually and collectively to help close the gap and to help achieve our various goals. I do hope I played a small role during the past month in helping you realize that reaching your professional goal is within your grasp. It is possible, both working individually, what you're doing, but also working together collectively. I do hope to see you tomorrow morning. I will be hosting a 30-minute BPM open Q&A session on our 31st day, which is, of course, closing out our 31 consecutive days of sessions, events, all designed to help attendees, help Black professionals step up, stand out, and break through. So tomorrow morning, Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern time, I'll be facilitating this open Q&A. I sent out the URL yesterday to the attendees, but if you did not receive it, please do go ahead and email me at Denise Kegler, Denise at MDK Brand Management. Sorry, I have so many URLs in my head. Denise at mdkbrandmanagement.com, and I will send you the URL. I will send you the URL to join the Q&A session tomorrow. So again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of Black Professionals Month. We are so appreciative to have you here. Thank you, guys.
Well, for the past 31 days, we have had an opportunity to share with you and many others the connections, collaborations, information, resources that Black professionals have. And it's abundantly clear to me that Black professionals all over the world, once we put together our heads, our minds, our hearts, come together and share and collaborate, there will be nothing that we can't accomplish. And so we are looking forward to, as we go forward, while we know that Black Professionals Month ends on October 31st, as we've been talking about all throughout the month, Black Professionals Month is a party, so to speak, and then the ICABA World Community is the after party. We have the opportunity now so that when in the past we've come together and we've convened and we've gathered and we've created energy and excitement about wanting to take something forward, then you come back and you ask, hey, what happened? You know, we came together, we said we were going to do this, and then 30 days later, no one even remembers what you said you were going to do. Well, we have a platform now. We have our own platform so that we can continue forward. And so I want to share with you a couple of things right now that will help you to be able to do that. So I know that there is the ICABA World Community. We have our online ecosystem, which is going to allow you to be able to move from what you've been doing for this past month into the very aggressive and opportunities to be able to get together and be a part of the overall community that is here for us.
First, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank
to be able to grow and also build this community that's going to allow us to be able to really be able to, from not just the standpoint of your next door neighbor or the person that's working in your community, but people from all across the world, that Black professionals, whether we're talking about in Brazil, whether we're talking about in Canada, whether we're talking about in the Caribbean or Africa or South Africa, we will be able to be together and to be able to share and build those relationships that are going to help us to be empowered. And so I'm going to share a couple of things with you right now that will give you an example of where you're going to be able to be. And I also want you to see, because we have recorded everything that we've done. So if you're interested in wanting to keep this party going, if you will, then come to the ICABA World Community. And from here, you will be able to find the community, to find the network of the marketplace where you can find those opportunities that we've been talking about. And so as an example, we have the ICABA community, which I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into what we have here for you.
What can I say about ICABA? It is like the best experience I've had as an entrepreneur. My business has grown to what it is because of the relationships in ICABA.
ICABA is great. It's really a great incubator for connections and business relationships and educating new business people into the world of business.
What is ICABA doing? ICABA is putting you in an environment where you can rub shoulders, you can actually talk to wealth creators, to entrepreneurs who may look like you, who may come from circumstances like you, who may come from an environment like your environment. And then once you go ahead and grab that baton, you might say, well, this is possible. This individual over here did it, and now I can do it. So ICABA is raising our level of vision, and they're doing a fantastic job.
I'm Bill Pickard, chairman of Global Automotive Alliance, and I can't believe what ICABA has done again. Just wonderful people, very energized and very economically and entrepreneurially driven.
Hi, my name is Jermaine Beebe. I'm the current president and CEO of the Greater North Miami Chamber of Commerce. I would say for anyone who's interested and who is looking to network and actually get value out of joining an organization, you will certainly see the value in ICABA.
I encourage everyone to come and just share and just be here and just get to know the people. You know, I've met some fantastic people, and my network has just grown tremendously, and my business has grown tremendously. And it's an organization that just believes in just people who have ambition, people who just really want to go after their dreams. Like, you really can do that here, and people here really support each other. So I encourage you to come. We're excited to support you and all our new members. This is just a fantastic place, and I'm so happy that Jerome executed this vision so perfectly.
So that's a little bit about who we are, and we invite you to come and understand that this is not a one-time, one-off opportunity in terms of Black professionals coming together, but it is an ongoing opportunity, and we're going to be working with you to be able to do that. So I just want to say thank you to the team. I want to thank you to all the attendees who've been a part of being here, and we're going to go ahead and close out. I think that Gina has a screen we're going to in the chat about the where you can see the videos from all of the past events that we've done, including this one from today's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're going to wish you have a great day, have a great weekend, and thank you for being here.